I'm glad we were able to do this. I think it's I don't know. I've been interested in just kind of hearing your guys' story, and hearing, you give it you give it a defense of your group with Bishop Pfeiffer. So I'm glad you wanted to come on and or have this discussion. I enjoyed our phone conversation that we had. Was it maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and I'd like to almost kind of in some ways kind of replicate that. Where we're just talking and just engaging in what I'm saying, just being able to dialogue about what's going on here with your group. But for those who maybe aren't familiar with you, I became familiar with you. Initially, I think when you were a seminarian, we were having email exchanges. That was a while back, but mainly through X, and having some fun exchanges regarding Sedevacantism and so forth. Which I know you're not Sedevacantist, I'm Sedevacantist, but we're not going to talk about that today. But I enjoyed those kind of talks, and then just getting in, and then in those conversations with you, talking a little bit about your group, what you guys believe, and finding out a little bit about you guys articulating a defense for the criticisms that are hurled toward Bishop Pfeiffer and your group. I know you probably don't like this term, but I hear this term, and I want to know what you think of it, Father Adam, of Pfeifferite. Have you heard that?
I've heard it. I'm more familiar with Lefebvrite or Lefebvrist.
Okay, well, do you guys get called that too?
Not for us, but that's what they called the SSPX back in the day too. So yeah, I've definitely heard that.
Father, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, before we go any further, I can lead us in a prayer here.
Go ahead, Father.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and in the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady of Sorrows,
pray for us.
Our Lady, Seat of Wisdom,
pray for us.
Saint Bernard,
pray for us.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Okay. Great feast of Saint Bernard, doctor of the church. So he's sometimes considered the last father of the church as well. So
is it really? Okay.
Yeah, sometimes, but not strictly speaking. It's kind of loosely speaking. He's father of the church, but he's one of the strongest doctors of the church, of course, for Our Lady in particular.
Father, I don't know if people may or may not, be familiar with you. Maybe you could just share a little bit about just who you are in your relationship with Bishop Pfeiffer and his group, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yes. So I was ordained a priest by Bishop Joseph Pfeiffer 1 year ago, June 29th, the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul, along with two other confreres, Father Midgley and Father Blazak. And how I sort of came in contact with him was, it's kind of a long story, but ultimately I was attending the SSPX and going to the college in St. Mary's, actually. And my father had connected me with Father Pfeiffer at the time. This was in 2018, actually. So not too long ago. And while I was on the phone with Father Pfeiffer, speaking to him, he kind of walked me through some things of like the compromise of the SSPX and, if I hadn't been noticing any problems, and things like that. And I had been noticing some things, and a couple of things in particular stood out, and I could go over those another time maybe. But ultimately, I came in contact with him through my father in 2018 while I was attending St. Mary's College, which is the SSPX's main, well, it's the only college in the United States as far as I'm aware of.
Father, how far away is that the school you're going to in relation to where Bishop Pfeiffer's group is right now?
So it's well, it's about I think it's somewhere around 600 or 700 miles away, maybe 600 miles away, but it's a good 9-hour drive or so. So where our seminary is here and where I was ordained, we operate as a parish. We operate as a seminary. Also the priory. It's the only priory in the United States, and so it's a good distance from St. Mary's, Kansas, a good 9-hour drive or so to St. Mary's, Kansas. But ultimately, I was actually, well, I don't know if you want me to explain kind of backstory on, my vocation and whatnot and how it led up to meeting Bishop Pfeiffer, or you're just thinking more about how I met him initially.
Well, I think that might be a little bit interesting to get a picture of who you are as well. Like to kind of almost be like a spokesman for the group. Yeah. How did
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me get a little bit into that, a little bit just what some of that background you were talking about.
Okay, so well, ultimately, I grew up within the Novus Ordo. Grew up in the Novus Ordo, baptized, and my family would go to mass every Sunday at the Novus Ordo. And when I was about 19 years old, I started thinking about the priesthood, and this was still within the Novus Ordo. And I prayed a lot about it, thought about it, asked for advice about it, spent long hours in prayer at the college in the Adoration Chapel. This is when I was going to Benedictine College in Kansas, and I just started being drawn a little bit towards the religious life in general, but then it kind of started to hone in more particular in my thoughts and prayers towards the priesthood. Well, I was 19 at that time when I was starting to pray seriously about the priesthood, and I decided to take a year off, turned into 2 years off of college, and started thinking about, how do I move towards the seminary? How do I get formed as a priest and all that? So I started applying, and I applied to the diocese. My diocese was Superior, Wisconsin, and ultimately I got through all the hoops because they require a lot of jumping through hoops. You have to apply to the diocese itself, then you have to apply to the college in which the seminary, the Novus Ordo Seminary, resides. Then you have to apply to the Novus Ordo Seminary, and then you have to get a psychological evaluation, which I don't know how that's helping in the Novus Ordo, but it ultimately I passed and got approved and everything for all of the different steps, and then I was just waiting on them to schedule the psychological evaluation. And ultimately, they never scheduled it. I never had the psychological evaluation. So I can say truly and sincerely, I did not pass their psychological evaluation because I never did it. But, so anyways, I had looked at the Novus Ordo Seminary. They were very slow moving. And in that time, I was getting involved with coaching sports and teaching catechism at the local Novus Ordo church, my parish back home. And ultimately, I ended up deciding to go back to college because nothing was coming of the seminary. And through a good friend that kind of advised me to go back. And I went back to college. And while I was going back to college, it was that Christmas break I had taken just kind of go interiorize, just think about, where am I headed? What direction am I going? I had thought about the priesthood, and, it kind of got pushed off to the side a little bit. And so then I just started thinking about, well, if I want to be a priest, I want to be a good priest, obviously. And, the diocesan seminary is very liberal. And that was one of the things my good friend advised me about, that it was going to be very liberal. And I was going to suffer through it. And so I had remembered, my dad speaking to me when I was younger about how certain things bad happened after Vatican II, such as priests running off and nuns running off, and just, a lot of things, a lot of chaos happened after Vatican II. And so I actually just started researching online, and this was like on my own accord, of course. On my Christmas break, I was technically a sophomore in college at this point, at Benedictine college. And I started thinking about, okay, where do I find a good seminary? What about tradition? What about Vatican II? I didn't even know what tradition really was. And so I started looking up Vatican II and videos on it. I had come across Father Gregory Hess, Canon Hess. And ultimately, it was him explaining the Society of St. Pius X, its position, the Fraternity of St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King, and then combined with another video on how the new Mass is sacrilegious and that it's blasphemous and it's not the proper worship of God. And then he outlined heresies of Vatican II, and that's ultimately where I came across, understanding the fight for tradition. And so, coming back, to where I was at in my mind about the priesthood, I started to realize, well, maybe I need to get something a little more under my belt if I didn't realize how bad things really were in the world. Like, I had a certain understanding. I knew about wars, and I knew there were genocides, and I knew certain things were going on that were bad around the world, but I didn't realize it was impacting the entire Catholic Church in the sense of false doctrine and things like that being promoted by priests and popes and things like that. So ultimately, I was geared towards the SSPX. I had sent my father a couple of videos on Father Hess, and basically right away, both of us were convinced, not because of any abuses or anything that we saw in the Novus Ordo, because like I said, I attended the Novus Ordo every Sunday, every Holy Day of Obligation. And so it wasn't because of any abuses per se, though we cringed at a lot of different things that happened within our own parish. It wasn't because of any abuses per se or clown masses and things like that. It was because we learned that through Father Hess, the way he explained it, that the Mass itself in its most conservative traditional form, the new Mass, is not a proper Mass and it's a sacrilege. So ultimately, my father and I decided to go to the SSPX in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we started going to Mass there for, maybe 6 months, and then I finally had entered into actually St. Mary's College. I had looked at applying there just because I wanted to get some more traditional understandings of the crisis in the Church and everything under my belt before I seriously considered moving forward with the priesthood.
I know. I know. I remember when I was first looking at these kind of issues, I watched a lot of Father Hess's videos as well, and he's a very entertaining. And I say entertaining, but he's a very good speaker. I mean, like, and he's captivating.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. So.
And he always had his big jug of wine.
He
always had his glass of wine and his jug under the
definitely
table.
A character. He was definitely a character. So it is interesting. One of the things that he mentioned, and this I know is a little bit off topic, but he mentioned quo primum and talking about quo primum as the standard for why the new Mass is not valid. Am I'm understanding? It's been a long time since I've listened to him, but is that something?
I don't think that's the reason he gives for it. I honestly, at the moment, I can't remember about for sure his position about whether the new Mass is valid or invalid. I want to say he thought it was invalid, but not because of quo primum. Definitely, he would bring up quo primum as a reason for the new Mass to be illegitimate or unlawful.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking about. You're right.
Yeah. But I'm not sure about the other thing. But yeah, he was a big part in my I guess you could say conversion to tradition, because ultimately I was in good faith. My father was in good faith in the sense of we were truly, as Archbishop Lefebvre says, like, we were truly confused Catholics. We didn't understand completely what was going on in the church. But so then I ended up going to St. Mary's, Kansas, to the college. I left Benedictine College, and just to pursue education. I wasn't really looking at any sort of degree at that point. And even while I was at Benedictine College that second year, I wasn't really thinking about a degree. I kind of emphasized philosophy, but I knew I probably wouldn't, make a career out of that. But I ended up going to St. Mary's College, and this is in the fall of, well, actually, it's 2017 when I first went to the SSPX. So this was in the fall of 2017 that I ended up going to St. Mary's College. And it was there where, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it while I was there, made some really good friends. But all the while I was there, slowly here and there, I was starting to realize some problems. And then when I had that phone call with Father Pfeiffer, it kind of just solidified in my mind and kind of articulated those problems, such as, saying the main problem with Vatican II is ambiguity. And I kind of argued with the professor priest about that in the middle of class, actually, because I remember learning from Father Hess and just thinking to myself, the main problem is heresy with Vatican II, not ambiguity. Ambiguity is a tool that helps reinforce the heresy. But anyway, so there were little things that turn out to be really big things like that I started to realize that weren't quite right. And mind you, this is within my first year of attending, my first full year of attending SSPX masses. I had been acquainted only with going to the Novus Ordo. And so I had gone to an Ignatian retreat while I was at the college, and ultimately I kind of made a resolution, I did make a resolution that I was going to pursue the religious life, and I'm going to have to figure out which direction that means. And so I actually started calling the Silver City, New Mexico Benedictines there, and trying to set up a visit. And then I had set up a visit and began a sort of application process to SSPX out in Virginia. And it was right around that time in the spring of 2018. It was right around that time when I got in contact with Father Pfeiffer, and he had told me, go to Mass. So we have Father Hewko down the street in St. Mary's. And I knew that, even though there's 6 Masses at St. Mary's College every Sunday, my friends would probably figure out, but I didn't really care, because I knew when I was attending the SSPX, I was attending the SSPX because I believed this is where the faith is, not because they're a certain group and they're, an official group or something, just because I thought that's where the faith was. And if I could come across another priest that was carrying the faith, which that's how I looked at the situation with Father Pfeiffer and Father Hewko at the time, then no problem going to Mass there either. But of course, I slowly began to realize more and more the problem with the compromise of SSPX. I ended up going to Mass with Father Hewko there in St. Mary's on one Sunday, and he talked to me, and he said, Adam, you need to go, you need to come visit the seminary. And I said, well, Father, I already I kind of set up a visit to the Benedictines. I set up a visit to SSPX in Virginia. And he said, well, it's on the way back home. Where are you from? I'm like, Wisconsin. I'm like, well, that's on the way back home, he said. And I said, okay, well, fine. All right. I'll come visit after I go visit the SSPX seminary. So that's ultimately what I ended up doing. I kind of put the Benedictines, the idea of that, on the back burner for now, because I was trying to figure out, what is this whole thing Father Hewko was talking about, and Father Pfeiffer about the doctrinal compromise and things like that with SSPX. I went out to Virginia, and that was in early summer in June, to visit. And I noticed they had a lot of things that seemed prim and proper, and they had, the chant, and they had, beautiful brand new buildings and everything like that. But one thing I did notice in particular right away while I was there is, I really liked the young men. I got along with them. We were playing sports and, having fun, joking around and sitting in class a couple of days. But as soon as I would bring up anything about Vatican II or the new Mass, and didn't matter how I brought it up, whether it was in a joking way, a serious way, a light way, all the different ways I could have thought I could bring it up, about the crisis in the church and Vatican II, it was almost like that's not what we talk about. We don't discuss this. And they didn't say that, but the mannerisms and the silence, really, when I would bring up anything about Vatican II, was very deafening to me. Here I was, kind of like I'm thinking here, there's a crisis in the church. I want to contribute somehow to the relief of the crisis in the church, to, restore the Catholic faith. And these young men, yes, I was a couple years older than them. I was, 22 or 23, going on 23 at the time. So a lot of them were 18, 19. And then the deacons were like my age, and the priests were almost my age. But at the same time, it almost seemed like they either weren't familiar with the topics, or they really just thought maybe we shouldn't talk about those subjects. So to me, that was kind of the telltale of like, I don't know about this place. I didn't, condemn it in my mind in the sense, and they weren't too fond of welcoming me either. I had spoken to the rector, and they weren't too fond. He said, talk to your spiritual director, see if it's something for you. And here I was, I'm like, this is kind of the same answer I was getting in the Novus Ordo. It's like, I'm one of the few guys in the world, or not in the world, but in my diocese at the time, that was trying to apply for the priesthood, to pursue the priesthood and formation thereof. And they were just taking their kind of time and just saying, well, maybe it's for you, maybe it's not. And, my idea was jump in, and if it's not for you, they'll tell you eventually. But they kind of figured out maybe in 5 or 10 minutes of talking to me that, yeah, this isn't for you, maybe. So I ultimately, it wasn't a really serious visit, I guess, except on my part, I was trying. And so when I went to Boston, Kentucky, which is Father Pfeiffer at the time, his seminary, which, by the way, his seminary, the seminary Our Lady Mount Carmel, was established in 2013, and it was blessed by Bishop Richard Williamson.
Really?
It was blessed by, and Father Pfeiffer being the founder. So I came and visited, and mind you, this is only 5 years after the seminary is founded, so 2018. And right away I could tell, okay, yes, there's not like all of the things, like the smells and the bells, like, like the mainstream SSPX had, where everything's perfect, and in the sense of like, structurally, we got older buildings, we got, just not everything's pristine, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things I noticed right away in sitting in the classes and listening to Father Pfeiffer lecture as a professor, and talking to the seminarians and engaging with them, I immediately noticed that the faith was super serious to them, but yet at the same time, they were able to like express their personalities in a way that was like, and I'm not saying anything like really bad about the gentleman at SSPX, but it was hard to kind of gauge their personalities there. It almost seemed like they kind of had to fit a certain bill, otherwise they're kind of out of line. And I felt like I was out of line when I was there. Like I wasn't going to fit their bill.
Father, do you think maybe like if you're comparing the two seminaries, the one that you visited and Bishop Pfeiffer's seminary, do you think, I don't know, are the people that were going to Bishop Pfeiffer seminary, were they kind of like yourself, that they didn't grow up in tradition and they kind of converted, and maybe like the SPX are more grew up in it and it's kind of familiar, and they're not as, I don't know what do you have, like
no,
that comfort feel type thing?
No, actually, the majority of them were more like cradle traditional.
Even at Bishop Pfeiffer's?
Yes,
Okay.
more so. Yeah. I mean, my initial class, we had 7 of us enter. That was a little different, but only 3 of us made it, and 2 of them were basically cradle traditional. So the ones that grew up in the Novus Ordo, they basically didn't make it through the seminary. 3 of us out of the 7 did. But yeah, so it's majority. I would say majority. I'm trying to think of other exceptions. Almost majority grew up in tradition. So I'm kind of somewhat of an exception. I can't think of another example off the top of my head right now, but yeah. So no, they grew up that way, most of them. And so when I came here and I visited, two of the seminarians were arguing about, the miracle of Luciano, the Eucharistic miracle, and they're engaging about, serious things and matters of faith, and they're using philosophy in doing so. Mm-hmm. And then combine that with Father Pfeiffer at the time, his very clear condemnation of evolution, and he always has taught us as synonymous with modernism. Evolution is modernism, and that's what St. Pius X was talking about, was evolution.
That's one thing you're starting to see in the mainstream SSPX with Father Robinson. I mean, outright teaching that. So I was actually very surprised when I was starting to listen to traditional priests, first with like FSSP types online. I went through this progression. So I would listen to FSSP types, and they were even the priests that I was listening to that were with the FSSP were condemning evolution. And I remember when I came into the Novus Ordo, evolution was considered like a fact. So I thought that's what the Catholic Church taught. I thought they taught that. So when I started hearing FSSP priests saying that they reject evolution, I was like, oh, so maybe this is a debate within the Catholic Church. And then I would listen to more. I think I even listened to at the time Father Pfeiffer and maybe even Father Hewko talk about it. Because I mean they're online. So I think anybody they got to be familiar, at least hearing their sermons, if they've gone through through tradition of one way or another. They've listened to Father Pfeiffer, Bishop Pfeiffer, and Father Hewko condemning evolution, and so I thought that was like I was under the impression that that traditional Catholics just all outright rejected it. So when I was listening to Father Robinson supported, I was actually kind of surprised. I don't know. I thought that was he's the first one that I remember hearing. I mean, maybe others believe it, but he's most vocal.
Right.
So I was surprised by that.
Yeah. And so that the condemnation of that, and then he also that year he did an opuscula against sedevacantism as well. So just outlining the errors and things like that, and how it connects to the crisis in the church. So it was and then also Galileo, and how that ties into evolution, and how the revolution, the Copernican revolution, affected the church, and that once you start questioning the Bible, the scriptures, then you diminish the faith, because Galileo said that the Holy Bible, the sacred scriptures, are first in regards to its authority. It is first in matters of faith, but last in matters of science. And so this is where that whole teaching of evolution, even though it became famous with Charles Darwin, it was already thousands of years ago with Democritus. It's an old heresy, and it just kind of got rehashed out by modern heretics such as Galileo, but in particular Charles Darwin, and then now in the modern church. So that's. Oh, go ahead.
So when once you finally left the seminary there in Virginia, or at least visiting it, and your father introduced you, say, hey, go check out this priest, Father Pfeiffer. How long after that did you got on the phone and talk to him? Did you eventually meet with him in person and kind of get set up with him?
You mean with Father Pfeiffer in person?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it was. I mean, as soon as I visited here, I met with him in person. It was as soon as I came here, talked to him and talked to the seminarians, and basically, while I was here, I realized this is where the truth is. This is where I want to be. And I even told one of the seminarians, I'm coming back. I'll be back in the fall. They have their Ignatian retreats every year in the fall. We have our Ignatian retreats in October for the men. And So I did in fact come back. And the formation in particular, I would say the formation of philosophy is, I know it is the most essential, because the philosophy is in which lens and how you guard and guide the theology. And so my first 3 years were kind of quintessential to the whole formation, and yeah, so I ultimately decided to come here, and realizing that they were condemning heresies, they were teaching the true Catholic doctrine, outlining how Vatican II was wrong very clearly, and that's where I came to tradition at. That's what I thought the SSPX was at that time.
When you got to Father Pfeiffer's seminary, or Bishop Pfeiffer, but Father Pfeiffer at the time, his seminary. At the time, there wasn't. I mean, maybe there was. Maybe you can explain. Was there this controversy around Bishop, or Father Pfeiffer at the time? Was it controversy around him as there is like today? Because when you got there, he was one of the initial guys, right? Like that started the resistance.
The resistance. He helped. Yeah, he was one of the leading. He was one of the great leaders of the resistance.
The reason
I would say, even though I was there, it was Bishop Williamson. He's of course a big figure, but him, Father Pfeiffer, Father Hewko, I believe it was Father Ruiz, but Father Chazal as well. There were a couple others that really stood up at first. I even want to say at first Father Scott, I'm not sure which one it was, that was initially sort of in favor of the resistance, but then he ended up staying with the SSPX. So, just a little backstory here. So in 2012, of course, a lot of people are aware, but it's good to kind of rehash this. And 2012, the SSPX had kind of made a movement towards Rome, in the sense of trying to make a practical resolution or a practical deal with Rome, which Archbishop Lefebvre was very clear about that before he died. No more practical deal. We will tell Rome, if you accept Quanta Cura, if you accept Quas Primus, if you accept Pascendi, if you accept what the popes prior to Vatican II said in their traditional encyclicals, there's no problem. You just have come back to tradition. We haven't moved. And so it's up to Rome to change where they're at. And so for him, it was very clear, you don't make a practical deal with modernists. He attempted to, and he learned eventually they tried to trap him, right? And he ultimately changed his mind when he signed the 1987 protocol, the May 5th, I believe it was May 5th protocol. In 1987, I believe it was. He changed his mind about it and realized this is a problem. I can't make a deal about a bishop. I can't make a deal on any practical solution with Rome. So the SSPX in 2012 had their general chapter, and in vain of that general chapter, the document of the doctrinal declaration basically got leaked. It was supposed to be in Cor Unum, which is an internal publication to the priests, and it was saying, that the new Mass was legitimately promulgated, and that we have to look at Vatican II in the light of tradition, and it was quoting Lumen Gentium as if it was an authority about, the authority of the bishops and things like that. And that was, at that point, that was an official break in the minds of priests like, Bishop Williamson, Father Pfeiffer, Father Ruiz, Father Hewko, and they stood up and spoke out against Bishop Fillet, and they were disciplined for it. Father Hewko, I don't believe he was ever officially expelled, but Bishop Pfeiffer was expelled, and I do air quotes, of course, because it's illegitimate, because when you stand up for the faith and it's for a reason of faith, then, it's not a legitimate expulsion. But nonetheless, they soon after collaborated together, the priests, and there were about, from what I've heard, around 100 priests that had left or been sent out of the society at that time in 2012. Now, some of them, what might have been because they had problems, maybe moral problems and things like that, but a lot of them, maybe 50 or 60% of them or more, were because they didn't like the liberalism of the SSPX with the doctrinal preamble and declaration. And so they stood up, and it was finally in 2013 that Father Pfeiffer established well, the resistance technically started in Philippines with Father Chazal and Father Pfeiffer. But then Father Pfeiffer came back to the United States, which is where he grew up in Boston, Kentucky, where our current seminary is right now on this property. So, his pastor, Father Hannafin, kept the old Mass and the traditions of the faith. After Vatican II, he refused to say the new Mass, and he died around, I believe it was the year 2000. And so he was the old pastor. And so the SSPX had been servicing here for a little while, up until maybe a couple years before that, and maybe even up until 2012. But then Father Pfeiffer decided to use it as a base and establish the seminary here. And then, like I said, this is where it was established. And there were a few priests that were here initially, and now it's been 12 years. So, but ultimately, it was because of the modernism of the SSPX they decided to start a new seminary. And now Father Chazal has a small seminary still going in the Philippines, even though he's with the Bishop Williamson bishops now. And so,
Father, so when the reason I mentioned that when you were first starting to meet Father Pfeiffer at the time, and then getting to know them and being part of that group, there wasn't the controversy around the group
yes,
as there is today, right? Like were they more?
Sorry, I forgot about that question.
Yeah, were they more in union with each other? Like, were they more like, was he still working with Father Chazal, in the Philippines, and maybe Bishop Williamson, and maybe some of Bishop Williamson? I don't know how. There's at some point they were all working, and then what caused this rift, and that we can get into maybe your the defense for your group, but at the time there wasn't what it is today. Like, what brought that about, do you think?
Right. Okay, so yes, when I came, the Father Chazal and Bishop Williamson were not with us anymore.
Okay.
Bishop Williamson, I believe, around the same time, stopped being quote unquote associated with us around the same time as Father Chazal and maybe one or two other priests, but those are the two prominent ones I know about. Around early 2016 or maybe late 2015.
Do you mind sharing that? What brought that about?
Yeah. Okay. So ultimately, Bishop Williamson, when he was sort of kind of helping, or at least being around the seminary, he wasn't a professor at all from the start, but he gave maybe a couple conferences and things like that, but not a professor. He basically, there were two major things. Number one was, it was around 2015 that Bishop Williamson started talking about miracles in the new Mass, and basically how there's grace in the new Mass. And Father Pfeiffer was very, very stark about that and clear, and Father Hewko as well, that there's not grace in the new Mass, because if something is against the law of God, it doesn't have graces, right? Just because something, maybe you believe it to be valid, doesn't mean there's graces there to be received from the Mass itself. So it was ultimately that discrepancy, which is a big one, because that's part of the huge fight of tradition. And then also Bishop Williamson didn't really believe, the second kind of more major thing was, he didn't really believe in organized, formed groups, like structured, like Father Pfeiffer was trying to do. He says, things are so bad, things are so horrible, the crisis is so bad that, to try to form men in these times, it's almost impossible, because there's hardly anything left of masculinity and men to be formed, and intellect and everything. That was kind of where he was coming from. And then I guess kind of like a third thing was that he didn't really like our main lay helper here. So he didn't like him. I never heard of like any problems between them, the two of them, but he didn't like him, and ultimately he left because of that. And then we continued to be separated from him because of the fact of him, saying that there's graces in the new mass. And in one conference in particular, I think it was out east, maybe in Boston or something, where there's still video of it, where a lady asks, what do I do, if I find myself like I can't go to mass anywhere else but the Novus Ordo? And he says, well, if you feel that that's where you can get graces, or you feel like that's where you can your soul is going to be nourished, then I'm not going to recommend against it. And so that's very starkly against what we stand for about the new mass. We're very clear about that's wrong. It's wrong for the new mass.
So I remember. Okay, so I remember. I saw that. I did see that. I saw a video where he was discussing that. Is that maybe so? Because of the criticisms with Bishop Williamson stating those things, did that cause a rift maybe with, like, say, Bishop Pfeiffer and Father Chenal, and maybe or even, let's say, okay, and with the other resistant bishops that were connected with Bishop Williamson, like maybe Bishop Four or Bishop Sede, all these others?
Yeah. For them, I imagine it was a little different, the reasoning. Of course, by the way, this is something I think important to note, is that Bishop Williamson, when he was the rector of the seminary and the SSPX up until, I believe it was the year 2003, that's when it was from around 1987, I think it was founded, or maybe, no, earlier than that, 83, I think, in Richmond, or not Richmond, I think Connecticut, Ridgefield, Connecticut, excuse me. He was rector from maybe 1987 or something like that, because Father Sanborn was the rector at first, and then it was Father Williamson. So Father Williamson, and then Bishop Williamson actually was the main formator of Bishop Pfeiffer, Father Pfeiffer at the time, and he so where he gets a lot of his philosophy and things like that, and understanding of the crisis in the church, is from him. Because as far as we know, Bishop Williamson didn't talk about grace in the new mass before 2015 or so. But that's something I think important, that he was his formator, and that, Father Pfeiffer wanted to establish something, because we have to continue the traditional Catholic priesthood. We have to continue formation of priests. And the SSPX, no matter how many men they have to form, they're forming them in modernism now. And they probably really began before 2012. But 2012 was when the official shift was made in the SSPX. So no, the kind of the infighting, I guess you could say, it was kind of more around 2015, so a couple years after the seminary was established. And it was basically, from what I understand, some of it was personal, some of it was doctrinal, but on our part, for the most part, almost 100% doctrinal, because of the saying the grace in the new mass, and then the Bishop Williamson priests and bishops not speaking out against that very clearly, because their sort of leader was in favor, or talking about grace in the new mass and miracles in the new mass, and they weren't speaking out against it. And so because of that fact, we're sort of opposed to them, because they're not speaking.
Isn't that way you're sort of like, I don't know, you're kind of in a way separating yourself or isolating yourself, you could say, from the rest of the herd that weren't speaking out as well, and so maybe that kind of isolates you guys from the other resistance types, the other resistance groups. Interesting.
So there was that, and then they're kind of, to answer your question in short, I guess, there kind of always was some sort of controversy with the seminary here, whether it was Bishop Williamson kind of being opposed to it a little bit later on. Of course, like I said, he blessed the seminary, but then he talked about how modern men can't be formed properly and those kind of things. So initially, I think pretty much from the start, there's always been some sort of controversy. And if you look up things on certain places on the internet, you're going to find all sorts of crazy, wacky ideas about what goes on in the seminary. And it's like, most of the time.
Well, let me ask you this, Father. Let me ask you, Father Chenal, he has a seminary, I think, or at least I think he forms priests out in the Philippines. Did Bishop Williamson support his seminary?
I think he probably made a couple visits. I'm not entirely sure. I know that Father Chazal himself would have taken it on his own initiative either way, because he's a very, very, very zealous priest that is wanting to spread the faith everywhere. So I don't imagine he was super in favor of it, but I'm not aware of it directly. And then there's the South America. I believe it's Bishop Thomas Aquinas has his own seminary. So, I mean, they're not all in agreement. That's the thing, is Bishop Williamson was not in favor of like a quote unquote cohesive group that everyone, is on board on everything on the same way, which is kind of, it's clearly different than what seminary formation or, having a sodality of priests or fraternity of priests was in the past. Normally, you can have your own differences and opinions on things that you're allowed to have opinions on, but in regards to the faith, you don't change that. Everyone should be the same about that in the practical way of looking at that, like especially when you're talking about the new mass. If you're a traditional priest, that should be something that's very clear, right? And that's in the whole thing about evolution, I would say that's kind of what makes the difference between a traditional priest and a Novus Ordi, or a traditional priest and a modernist or whatever, is a clear understanding about Pascendi and evolution. And it doesn't mean everyone has to be a genius or anything, but no, they have their own seminaries in different places. There's one in South America, which I believe it's Bishop Thomas Aquinas, if I'm correct, and then Father Chazal as well. But ultimately, they just didn't. There wasn't a cohesion there between the seminary, Our Lady Mount Carmel, and them. So we just keep continuing forming priests. Father Pfeiffer and Father Hewko at the time when I first arrived, and then we had Father Poisson. He was a priest that had come over from the Fraternity of St. Peter, and then now we have a total of, let's see, I believe it's 13 priests with us, and 8, 9, 10, 11 of those priests, I believe, are priests that Bishop Pfeiffer ordained, and the 3 of them are in Africa, by the way. So we do have a seminary in Africa, and we do have missions in Africa, and we have about as many, or maybe even 1,000 more, so maybe 3,000 or more faithful in Africa, and then a couple thousand here that we bring the Mass and the traditional sacraments, obviously, to here in the United States. But
I remember when I was back. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I remember when I was years ago, and I listened to find Father Pfeiffer's stuff online. You would see Father Hewko together doing stuff, and they were pretty connected. Do you want to share with what caused that rift? Or
sure. Yes,
because they're not together.
Absolutely.
Because it seems like Father Hewko is trying to start his own seminary where he's at. I think in New Hampshire or somewhere. I mean, they're not together now.
It started in Boston. Now I can't remember where it is actually, but no. So ultimately, it's because Father Pfeiffer in 2019, we were talking about using this bishop who had, he had questionable orders as far as we could see, and we, were investigating into him and trying to find out where he got his orders from and everything like that. And he was in the Novus Ordo, and then he was out of the Novus Ordo, and we didn't know for sure what position he had. And so ultimately, it was because
the bishop. What was the purpose for the bishop?
For ordinations of us. Yeah. So we were looking at trying to use him for ordinations to ordain us. And this was my first year in the seminary, 2019. Really January, around early January is when Father Hewko left us, because he said Father Pfeiffer is going to lead the whole seminary off a cliff, and he's going to use this schismatic bishop, and he's going to lead the whole seminary off a cliff. And then ultimately what ended up happening was Father Pfeiffer, we did a lot of investigation. Well, he did his own investigation and even private investigation about this bishop, and then found that he wasn't, to be nice about it, he wasn't being forthright about his consecrations, and so we weren't going to use him. And Father Pfeiffer ended up writing a letter because Father Hewko was very clear: we can't use him, we can't use him, we can't use him. And this was only 2 weeks after or before he left, because before that he was not sure. We had been talking to this bishop a couple months before I entered the seminary in 2018, in the summer and the spring, and and Father Hewko wasn't entirely sure yet. But then when it came time, excuse me, when it came time for to kind of make a decision, Father Hewko was very clear. We can't use him. And then Bishop Pfeiffer, he said, yeah, we can't use him because he lied about his consecration. And so ultimately, Father Pfeiffer wrote a letter to show our faithful and show Father Hewko, we completely disassociate with this bishop. It's once and for all. We're not part with him. We're not dealing with him. We're not going to receive orders. We're not going to associate with him at all. And that's actually kind of exactly what Father Hewko wanted. And that was his stipulation. And he was threatening to leave because of that, bishop.
I was going to say, Father, can I just for clarity, Father Hewko's concern with this bishop was that his orders were either, or he was just, who is this bishop? Like that's what he's asking. Like he has a dubious background, and he was more concerned.
Yeah, mostly because of his dubious background, not necessarily from what because I was here and I talked to Father Hewko personally about it myself. From what I gathered, it was mostly just that he was a shady character.
Okay.
And that kind of fell in line with what Father Pfeiffer found about what he said about his ordination and consecration. Excuse me 1 second. I'm going to grab some water.
Yeah, grab some water, folks. That's good.
So that ultimately, Father Pfeiffer, even though he was Father Hewko's superior, he didn't cave to him. He was already planning on, writing this letter. And Father Hewko was super happy about the letter. And he even read part of it from the pulpit. And that was I believe it was in January, just a couple weeks before he left. And he said, "This is it. Once and for all, we have been disassociated from this bishop. End of story. New chapter." And those are almost exact words.
Sounds just like it.
And by the way, that's kind of, people might get mad at me because like it sounds like I'm mocking him, but I'm not mocking him. It's kind of an endearing thing because like Father Hewko, we do impressions of him here sometimes at the seminary, and it just remembering him. We want to be back with Father Hewko.
Sure, yeah.
We like Father Hewko to come back and stop attacking us, but he said it from the pulpit that we're finished with this bishop. That's it. Deo gratias, he said in his sermon. And so he had announced it, and then it was only, I believe, a week and a half or 2 later that he just left, even though that was the essential reason he gave for him kind of giving an ultimatum to Father Pfeiffer, his superior at the time, that he's going to leave because of this using this bishop, this dubious bishop. And so then by the way, it had nothing to do with Tookline at that time. Bishop Pfeiffer wasn't consecrated a bishop until a year and a half later, right? And we weren't even in contact with Bishop Webster until, a year and a half later, almost a year later. But so yes, now his new reason for being separated for us is not that bishop, that dubious bishop in 2019, but because of the Tookline, in particular the Tookline.
Okay.
So yeah, he wasn't being really forthright about it. And that's a whole history too. Talking to Father Hewko, I've talked to him on average once a year or so, and then met with him a couple times in person.
Do you, Father? I'm not trying. I don't want this to seem, don't take it as a question, not to be mean or insulting, but do you think maybe it's possible that maybe Father Hewko, after this incident, because it's probably, it probably would have caused. Just to take his side, if you could say, like, do you think it's possible that he was like, if he's willing to make a mistake like this, maybe I don't know if I can trust future judgments. Do you think, if, and he was like,
I think ultimately that's where, I think that's ultimately where it comes down to. Okay. And that's kind of where the attacks of the seminary are, no matter what, whether it's an attack on the seminary or the lay help or, any individual seminarian or whatever. It really just comes down to, he was just uncomfortable.
Okay.
And that, maybe it was a trust issue and things like that. But ultimately, we know the truth as traditional Catholics. It's like, we don't put our trust in any man, right? Archbishop Lefebvre said it, and I would say the same thing about my superior, Bishop Pfeiffer. As soon as he starts, saying heresies or things like that, and Archbishop Lefebvre said the same thing. If I say something against the faith, correct me, and if I don't stand corrected, leave. But that's not where anyone can attack, Bishop Pfeiffer on. And that's the problem, is like, we made it very clear to Father Hewko, like, you can't leave for this reason. This isn't legitimate because we already disassociated from this bishop. And so to say, I'm not going to wait. And that's kind of what he said. I'm not going to wait until he, comes back and uses him again. But he already promised he wasn't going to use that bishop. And so it's ultimately a trust issue, which that's not, obviously how any priest should operate, is based off of whether I trust this guy or not. Is he speaking the truth? Can I stand with what he's saying? And I know that's kind of like, it seems like a blanket statement, but it is really important because I think it is kind of where a lot of people get hung up, is like, well, he does these things and he goes and establishes this chapel, and with or without like some of the faithful's permission. And I'm not even I can't even think of any exact examples, but because it's kind of like, I can imagine Father Chazal has a similar problem. And I think that's part of why he maybe only has 2 or 3 seminarians in Philippines after, 8 years or whatever of being established, is that, if you're gonna hold a beacon and you're gonna want to build and you're gonna want to trudge through the trenches, you're going to get, a lot of flack, and people are going to see that, and they're going to, because you're doing more actions than a lot of people, like especially the SSPX priests, where they're shutting down missions and things like that, because you're doing a lot of actions, people are seeing that, and there's more to criticize.
Okay, that's what you're saying.
So I'm not trying to say like everything Bishop Pfeiffer does is perfect, and even Archbishop Lefebvre, not everything he did was perfect, right? Even though he's kind of our hero and like saint that we think of in the last, since Vatican II.
You're kind of saying that he lays things out. What's the word where he not puts his emotion on his sleeve, or he puts his actions out there, and
they're out there. Yeah, and we're also, that's a good point too. We're also very visible, even though our channel's not huge or anything. We're very visible. We post our mass sites everywhere publicly. All people are welcome. Everyone's welcome to come to mass. We're very open out in the public, and our sermons are online, and we do live streams all the time. And I mean, our name's out there. We're not, as prominent obviously as the SSPX. So it's out there, and because it's out there, I think that's part of the reason why there will be more, negative thoughts about it and everything like that. But ultimately, you're right. Father Hewko's, kind of thought was, oh, he's going to bring him back. He's going to bring back that bishop. I'm not going to wait for that. And then I'm not going to wait for him to take everyone off the cliff, and that's, obviously not the right way to go,
Now, this is hypothetical, but I wonder if, let's say, if Father Hewko would have stayed, do you think, and we're gonna get into some of the criticisms, but like, do you think Bishop Pfeiffer would have worked with Bishop Webster, or do you think they would have been another route? Do you think, or what I mean? I don't know if Bishop Hewko or Father Hewko had ever talked about the Took line or that kind of thing before this ever happened. I don't know if you ever heard.
I'm not really familiar with him talking about the Took line before. I know he and Father Pfeiffer were opposed to Took bishops and priests in general because of the lack of formation, and that only is in regards to people going to mass with them. That not all of them, but a lot of them, there were garage bishops, there were priests just ordained kind of, in someone's house, and there was like one witness or whatever, which is, it happened. So I think, the lack of seminary formation, that was more of the attack on the Took line. Because even Father Pfeiffer was very clear about that, just generally it's not good to go to them because of the lack of seminary formation. And then the second problem of the sedevacantism that's generally there with Took. So it wasn't, Father Hewko will bring up, there, and that's another can of worms here, but
so it wasn't so much the invalidity issue of the Took line that he was, because if you listen to Father Hewko today, I guess, his sermons, he's constantly talking about how Bishop Took was crazy, and all the typical arguments you hear against Bishop Took, and that they can't, but pretty much that they're invalid priests, they're just not real priests. So I don't know. I was curious if that was something you had heard, or maybe his stance has changed since Bishop Pfeiffer has.
Well, he's having to be more. He's being more vocal because he has to have a reason to be separated from us. So he's more vocal. He didn't talk about Took line as often as he does now. I mean, I haven't found, and I've seen old sermons and things like that of Father Hewko's, and I haven't obviously listened to all of them, but I'm almost positive he didn't talk about Took line like he does now, right? And part of that is because he's kind of working against us in the sense of, telling people not to go to mass with us, and he has to have, a justification for not being connected or associated with us anymore. So an attack is on the Took line. And he'll bring up Palmar de Troya in particular, that schismatic sect which they made a pope, and that was Took line, and how that being associated and connected in any way, shape, or form with that taints you basically. That's kind of where he comes from, and that's go ahead.
I was gonna say, Father, what I kind of want to do now is I want to just get into some of the main issues. Like, so now we kind of I think we got a decent background, a little bit of just your story, and then the history, a little bit of your group. Like, I would be interested in getting into what are some of the main criticisms, because honestly, if I look online, I look at Bishop Pfeiffer, I don't ever hear good things.
Yeah.
And but I've listened to a lot of his sermons. I've enjoyed some of his talks, but it's nothing. It's a flood of negativity, and so and that was one of the reasons why, since I wanted to talk with you, and that was, and a lot of it had to do with our conversations on X in their spaces or whatever. Where I thought I'm like, you seem articulate, fun to talk with, and very personable, and even though we have our differences and the sedevacantism issue, we always had a very cordial talk. So I thought, well, it'd be interesting to just hear your side of this, your guys' side of the story. And so I thought, why not? Nobody's really sharing your side of the story. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to hear your side.
No, obviously we greatly appreciate that. It's helpful because, it's true. Like when you look up Bishop Pfeiffer or Our Lady of Mount Carmel or SSPX MC, you'll find a lot of negative commentary and a lot of negative verbiage. So ultimately, I would say that kind of, well, if you're talking, obviously, which is the majority of the audience, I'm sure, is traditional. The Novus Ordo, it's a different story, right? They're, they would say we're just schismatic or something like that, right? Just outright, because we say the Latin Mass without any permission and that kind of thing.
Well, in my circle, my audience circles, I think we'll start with that. I think in the set of contest circles, the main, I could say criticism, well, not main criticism, but one of the criticism here is the Novus Ordo Watch article or video or whatever, where they're criticizing the botched consecration by Bishop Webster, and then even if then not only that, but then also what we maybe dubious or uncertain or unfamiliar background of Bishop Webster himself. That would be more, I think, the things I've heard outside of like
no.
You're not Sedecondas, or you guys do Unukum and all that, which I don't want to get into. But those are probably be like the main ones from my background. Maybe from the SSPX background, we could talk about that, but they might be because of using took bishops and so forth. But from my background, that would be the main issue. I thought we could start with that one.
Absolutely.
Like how do you respond, Father, if someone says, I saw this the Novus Ordo Watch video, and Bishop Webster clearly botched this consecration, and therefore Bishop Pfeiffer is not a valid bishop. How say you, Father? Coming at you.
Respondeo dicendum quod. Right. So that's a really good. I was actually thinking of that article as you were asking me the question earlier, because that is one of the first things when you type in Bishop Pfeiffer, because the YouTube video has a lot of views from the Novus Ordo Watch about critiquing that ceremony. So ultimately, it comes down to, if you're listening to the form, which is the 16-word formula, which Novus Ordo Watch kind of emphasizes and picks out those words, of course, you can hear him say summum. You don't hear him say summum, right? The fullness or the wholeness or the summary of the priesthood, right? Summum. It's supposed to be summum is the proper Latin enunciation, but it sounds like he says summum, right? And so, that's the one word. And then the other one that they pull out is ministeri. They say it sounds like he's saying mysteri, like mystery, instead of ministry, ministeri. So ultimately, it comes down to the church, and through St. Thomas, and I decided to bring the St. Thomas's article on this when he's talking about, St. Thomas is talking about the form of the sacraments, which is the words of each sacrament, right? In St. Thomas's Summa, in Tertia Pars, the third part, question 60, Article 7, and reply to objection 3. And this is where it's really important to understand what's required for validity of the sacraments. He says, in reply to objection 3, if he who corrupts the pronunciation of the sacramental words does so on purpose, he does not seem to intend to do what the church intends, and thus the sacrament seems to be defective. But if he do this through error or a slip of the tongue, and if he so far mispronounce the words as to deprive them of sense, the sacrament seems to be defective. This would be the case especially if the mispronunciation be in the beginning of a word. For instance, if one were to say in nomine matris instead of in nomine patris. If, however, the sense of the words be not entirely lost by this mispronunciation, the sacrament is complete.
Okay.
All right. So he says, if the beginning of the word is so botched, for lack of a better word, then it would be arguably defective, he says. But if there be through the slip of a tongue, and he talks about intent in the sense of, like, if someone intentionally says it wrong, then he says, okay, it would seem it would be defective. The sacrament would be defective if they intentionally said it wrong. But he says, if through some mishap or the slip of the tongue, there's a slight mispronunciation, it seems the sacrament is complete. And so what's important here that St. Thomas is outlining is that this would be the case principally if the end of a word be mispronounced. For instance, if one were to say patrias et filias. For although the words thus mispronounced have no appointed meaning, yet we allow them an accommodated meaning, corresponding to the usual forms of speech. And so although the sensible sound is changed, yet the sense remains the same. So he says, if we were to say patrias et filias, which is completely, clearly different than patris et filii, right? Then he says it would be still valid because the meaning is still conveyed, right? And so, so when you hear in the video, if you go to the video of the consecration, you could use the Novus Ordo Watch, but you could also use our video of the consecration that we put out on YouTube. If you want to hear, if you think ahead of time, okay, someone told me he said mysteri, not ministeri, mysteri. You can almost hear mysteri if you're thinking about that word. It's kind of like, I don't know, there's like those silly little things online where you have, like, if you think of one word, you can hear that word in the same exact audio. But if you think of another word, you can hear that word. Well, what's important isn't so much what I hear, but what's being said, obviously. And so, like, it's clear what's being said based on the ritual too. And St. Thomas would say the meaning was still there, because even if you think he said mysterii, that has such a close and similar sound to ministerii, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the meaning is still conveyed, he would say. But I hear ministerii, and there was a critic that brought up that particular word, one of our bigger critics in local, and he himself accidentally said, "See, you can hear him say ministeri. I mean mysteri." He slipped up because it's like it sounds so similar, right? And he was attacking the consecration, right? But he slipped up because even in regular speech, it's like you could easily take that to mean what was written in the text of the book of the Pontificale Romanum, right? Which is the book that was used by Bishop Webster for the consecration. Summum, that's even more of a no-brainer. It's like if you use Englishification of that word summum, it's the same. It's the same. It's just you're pronouncing it in English tongue. It's the same word, right? So it's important because there have been so many priests that have used the incorrect pronunciation, which the church would never say is invalid for those priests, because there's so many English priests that will say hoc est enim corpus meum for the consecration of the sacred host. But the proper pronunciation, according to ecclesiastical Latin and perfected and modified properly by St. Pius X, is oak. No pronunciation of the H, right? And so we would have to go back and say, well, if anything, that would be more of an argument because the beginning of the word was made a different sound, and St. Thomas talks about that. The beginning of the word, or maybe the ending of the word, but he says the beginning of the word. If that's changed, then it seems it might be defective. But the problem is the meaning, what is meant is conveyed. Because Christ, there's something really important, I think, that needs to be pointed out about sacramental validity is that Christ knew that there was going to be evil men, and a lot of those evil men would be priests. And he knew that there would be dumb priests and some priests that wouldn't be able to pronounce words perfectly, right? So he made the sacraments as simple as possible to fulfill, right? And St. Thomas, again, says here, as long as the meaning is conveyed, and I would argue that 100% the meaning's conveyed in that video. If you listen to it, he's clearly looking at that text, and if you see that text and you hear those words, it sounds like ministeri. But you can, if you want to, think about the word mysteri, maybe you'll hear that word. But what's important is that the church has always said and always treated the sacraments with the privilege of the benefit of the doubt and of law. Similar to... Oh, go ahead. Sorry. So those are the two main attacks: ceremony, those two words in particular. And I think any reasonable person, you know, if they have like some sense or have ever heard priests pronounce their Latin, especially English speaking priests, in general, their pronunciation's horrible sometimes.
So what the main thing you're mentioning is that, to summarize, is that whether he was how he pronounced it, it was so minuscule that it wouldn't cause any invalidity because it didn't change the intention and the meaning of what was being said there. What you're saying,
right? Yes, and remember that the intention of intention of the sacrament is very important. A lot of people think it's the internal intention of the minister that's important. Yes, he needs to have the intention. He needs to be sober. He needs to know what he's basically doing. But it's not the intention within himself, whether he's a bad person or a good person, or whether he truly personally wants to confect, or whether he even believes in that sacrament, that makes it valid. Because Christ knew there would be many priests that would doubt, and there would be many priests that would, go against it. But what matters is he intends to do what the church does. That's the intention of the minister that's required for sacramental validity. The intention to do what the church does. So what does the church do? She puts hands on the priest or puts hands on the bishop, and she says a certain formula. He said the formula. He said the words. There was a ceremony that happened, and simply that's how most Catholics have treated the sacraments for 2,000 years is, did the ceremony happen? Okay. Well, I saw Father so-and-so afterwards, and he was just a goofball, and, he was smoking after Mass, and, was he really confecting the Holy Eucharist? That doesn't change whether he was confecting the Holy Eucharist. You're just talking about a character issue, right? So what St. Thomas very clearly says here, and again, I'll just refer listeners to this, is Tertia Pars, question 60, Article 7, reply to objection 3. Okay, he says that as long as the same meaning and sense of the word is still carried, right? And so he even says that patrias et filias, and I'm guessing this is in regards to baptism, that patrias et filias, which is not the proper declension of patri et filii, that still is valid because it conveys the same meaning, right?
This is like an anecdotal story, but I have a friend of mine who spoke with Bishop Webster and talked to him about this. And according to him, he said that that Bishop Webster had hearing issues, or he had hearing problems, or it was hard of hearing, or his hearing was going away, or something of that nature. So it was hard for him to know whether he's, verbalizing things exactly properly or not. I don't know. But that was one thing he had mentioned that's probably a interesting story. But I thought it was interesting to share that he said that he talked to Bishop Webster before he died. But
yeah, how recent was that? I'm just curious. Before he died,
I wish I asked him.
Well, it was sometime before he died, right? It was probably the last few years or whatever.
Yeah, I wish I didn't know. I don't
So
I probably asked him.
yeah, I can imagine like towards the end, he died this last fall, right? I believe it was October. I'm trying to remember the date. But this last fall is when Bishop Webster passed away. And up until that point, I don't remember him. Like I would have conversations with him, and I helped take care of him towards the end a little bit here and there, and the seminarians did as well. But I didn't notice any serious like hearing problem myself. I mean, probably he's older, but in 2020 when the consecration took place, that I talked to him personally at that time and one-on-one conversations, interacting with him and everything. I didn't notice anything like that. And
okay. I wish I'd asked some more clarity on that story, but when you mentioned it, I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So okay, there's that. The ceremony itself, you said, right?
Yes.
So I think it would be good to go look at Novus Ordo Watch's video. If you look at what they put out, they have the words, and then they match the words with the sound, with him enunciating those words. He's saying the words that are there. It doesn't make sense if they try to put it in another word. And I think that's what's really important is like they actually, if anything, I think that video actually just shows that that it was valid, because you have the words there and then they're matching up the sound that he's making to the words, and they're showing the Pontificale Romanum, the ritual. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it's kind of at that point. And the other thing is too, I think that's really important about this is as well, is that it was within an hour, I believe, of the ceremony itself. Because we live streamed it, it was with like an hour of the ceremony that they reacted to the form.
Okay.
So I think not looking at it and taking time like to look at it, I think is not very fair either. And then so I mean, it's to me, St. Thomas is very clear about it, and that the meaning is conveyed, and that's what's important.
So, Father, then the next question.
2,000 years we had priests that couldn't say the letter L for 2,000 years. Well, I don't know for sure how the Chinese language or the Asian languages, they say vegetable, buakui, sure. Right? They don't say the letter L, right? And there's plenty of forms of sacraments that don't have the letter L. And so to say he said mysterii and he missed that letter N in the middle of the word, which St. Thomas doesn't say the middle of the word, he says the beginning of the word. If that is defective, then it seems the sacrament is defective. But the middle of the word, there's plenty of sacraments with the letter L in them. And that would be, in that estimation of Novus Ordo Watch, bringing out that word, that would mean that millions, billions probably of sacraments have been invalid by the Oriental Catholics for 2,000 years, possibly. I don't know how the language evolved and all that, but so.
Okay, so that's a interesting point that you're making. So then the question I guess I would like to ask too is, what brought about then the need to do the private reconsecration that took place?
So ultimately, it was kind of like a situational call or judgment call, like kind of battlefield situation call, judgment call on Bishop Pfeiffer's part. When Novus Ordo Watch came out with that video, within like an hour or 2 hours of the ceremony itself, that video came out and we listened to it. It's like, it almost seems like maybe you could hear that. And so Bishop Pfeiffer made a judgment call kind of in the moment, the next morning actually, to proceed and do just the form conditionally, perform the form of the sacrament conditionally. In the chapel the next morning, just to be safe, and on further listening to it and kind of listening to Novus Ordo Watch's take, and then listening to the film itself that we had, we really don't really believe that was necessary at all, because of the fact that he carried the same meaning no matter what, even if you want to hear like mystery instead of ministeri. And so it was kind of a judgment call in the moment.
Sure.
And, obviously when, kind of dust is in the air and everything, and now there's this big traditional group, right? A pretty good sized traditional group, or figureheads of it, I should say, sort of attacking it. It was kind of like a, battlefield judgment call on the bishop's part. So
are you thinking that if let's say this video came out like 3 weeks later or whatever, or you may have had some time to reflect, maybe you guys probably wouldn't have done the second. You're confident enough that you wouldn't have, Bishop Pfeiffer's confident enough that we wouldn't have done the conditional after hindsight.
I would, in my opinion, I don't know if I haven't asked him that directly, but in my opinion, that's probably what he would do, is not have done it. If there would have been more time to just listen, and a couple times of listening to the video and realize, okay, he's saying the words that are on the paper, right? So that's why we defend the initial consecration, because it's pretty clear if you listen to it a couple times, which obviously we've listened to it over and over, right? That after listening to it a few times, it really seems like, okay, so just for the for the sake of being safe, kind of, Bishop Pfeiffer in the moment made that decision, right? That's the chief attack, is the ceremony itself, because there's a lot of people that find that, right? They find that video of Novus Ordo Watch. And then you brought up, what was the other one?
The other one is, at least from my perspective, at least from my own personal perspective, is the lineage of Bishop Webster himself. Hey, I'm going to see if I can get a little bit of light. I feel like it's getting a little dark.
Yeah, no problem.
Get a light real quick.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't know if it makes a difference or not, but
oh yeah, that helps a little bit.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah.
It's his lineage itself. So maybe because I've heard that his lineage is suspect, at least from set of conscious circles that I'm part of. Be interesting to. I don't know if that's a criticism you've heard or not. Maybe.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so
we do have a couple videos out on that, as well as the form of the ceremony as well. It's on a YouTube channel called Quo Primum 1. Quo Primum 1. It's a QUOPRIMUM, the number 1. And so people can find it on there. In Defense of Truth is the playlist, and it has like about Archbishop Took. It has about the ceremony. It's a few videos that I think are pretty good I know are pretty good. I've listened to them a few times over, that one of our seminarians put out with the bishop's help and our help as well. But so the lineage. Okay, so the episcopal lineage of Bishop Webster, which ultimately, comes down to us and my priesthood, and Bishop Pfeiffer as a bishop. He's of course a bishop through the priest through the SSPX. He was ordained by Bishop Fillet, but bishop through the Took line through Bishop Webster. It goes this way from Took. It goes first it was Took, then Gerard Delorier, Bishop McKenna, Bishop Slupsky, Bishop Webster, and then Bishop Pfeiffer. So he's 5 removed from Bishop Took. Delorier is one of the 3 that was consecrated. I believe the year was 1983. One of the kind of famous 3 that was consecrated. I believe it was, if I remember correctly, Carmona, Delorier, and I can't remember the third one, but they're famous enough where I forgot.
Bishop Zamora, Bishop Carmona, I think, and
yes, and Delorier, yes. So Delorier, interesting thing about him. So that's the episcopal line, right? Delorier himself, it's interesting. He was the personal theologian of Pope Pius XII. He was Pope Pius XII's personal theologian, and then after Vatican II, didn't like the changes and kind of rejected the Pope with Archbishop Took, and he was a priest, of course, while Pius XII was Pope, and he was his personal theologian. And then there's McKenna. He died, I believe, maybe 6-7 years ago, something like that. And then from McKenna, it's Ślubski. And Ślubski was a priest ordained in 1962, Polish priest. He was consecrated by Bishop McKenna. And then Ślubski was the one that consecrated Bishop Webster a bishop. I believe the year was, could stand corrected here, I want to say it was actually 2012 or 2007, I believe. And then I think Bishop Webster became a priest in 2002. He was a priest in 2002 and then a bishop in 2007 by Bishop Ślubski. And Bishop Ślubski passed away in 2018 as well.
Okay, so
that's the line of episcopacy, but what's attacked is not that line, but his line of priestly ordination. And
let me ask you before we get into that
point in which I
was going to ask you just thoughts. Is it if a person is not a valid priest, but then goes through a consecration rite, assuming he was a valid priest, you know what I'm saying? Does that make him a valid bishop, or does that screw things up? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, let's say he really was a valid priest.
So actually, Pope Pius XII argues, and I would, most people would say it's definitely authoritative. I'm trying to remember the name of the encyclical. I should know it. I want to say it's Sacramentum Ordinis, on ordinations, sacrament of ordinations. That Pope Pius XII wrote that the episcopacy contains the priesthood, so that if you're consecrated, the argument is, since that time of that encyclical, which I don't remember, maybe it was written in 1948 or 50 or something like that, when he was Pope, he says that the lower ordinations is contained in the higher. Okay. So that, for example, if you were ordained a priest, you would have within you deacon, subdeacon, exorcist, acolyte, porter lector. You would have those things. And because episcopacy is the fullness of the priesthood, it contains within it the priesthood, the simple ordination to priesthood. So that's the argument. So, we would argue that probably just based on that fact alone, and Pope Pius XII kind of answering that question that, just on being consecrated a bishop, it would contain the priesthood as well.
Okay,
so you'd be ordained a priest.
All right,
you're the fullness of the priesthood. Right?
So you're saying even if, like, say, let's say I'm obviously I'm a layman, and I go, I want to be consecrated a bishop. Never been consecrated a priest. Never been ordained a priest, and I get consecrated a bishop. Would that make me a valid bishop and priest and everything, even though I never went through the proper steps and all the other? That's what you're saying. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. But that's not like, I don't know if you could consider that per se. Like, you could argue that that's almost de fide. You could almost argue that, but I'm not entirely certain. So don't quote me on whether in that encyclical the way he said it makes it de fide, right?
Right.
Because it is the fullness of the priesthood. But anyways, they do attack. People do attack the priestly lineage, and it's because of Father Henneberry, who was ordained, he was consecrated a bishop by, I believe it was actually Palmar de Troya himself, the schismatic priest bishop that made himself the Pope.
Okay.
What people don't realize is that before Father or excuse me. I can't remember. Henneberry.
Henneberry. Okay.
Yes. Before he consecrated anyone further, the next one down the line, which I don't remember completely the priestly line right now, but the next one down the line is what matters, which is Terason, or excuse me, not next one down the line, the one that consecrated him conditionally before he consecrated the next man down the line. Terason, who was another bishop, was not associated with Palmar de Troya. Before Henneberry proceeded to consecrate anyone, Terason conditionally consecrated Henneberry a bishop. And I actually have, I mean, if your listeners were interested in it, I could send it to you. I have the, I don't know if the PDF form, but I have a picture of the certificate itself of Terason's consecration, which happened just shortly after, within a month or two, I believe it was, of Henneberry being consecrated by de Troya, Palmar de Troya. Because Henneberry probably realized, I don't want to be associated with this sect, and he decided to get conditionally consecrated by Terason. And so I have that document actually of Terason's consecration of Henneberry, and that's kind of the focal point in which people attack that Henneberry was, he was consecrated by Palmar, and that's schismatic, and so we don't have technically, there's not any association with us and Palmar de Troya, and that's where the attacks of Father Hewko mostly come from, is being associated with Palmar de Troya, which is ridiculous anyways, because we're never associated with him at all. Just because you were consecrated by Judas, or you're consecrated by, if Martin Luther became a bishop, or some other evil guy was a bishop and he consecrated you, doesn't mean you carry the taint of schism with you, right? So
the main problem, or you could say issue, criticism, is that Bishop Webster was ordained a priest by Bishop Henneberry, who was consecrated a bishop by one of the Palmar de Troya bishops, but then was later conditionally consecrated by Bishop Terason. To correct that, is that correct? That sound you were saying?
Was it breaking up for you there? Because it's kind of freezing on my end. Oh, for you?
No, it was work. It's been working, but
can you hear me?
I can. Yes, Father, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Father? Okay. Let me see. Add to stage. Okay, is it better?
Yeah. Sorry, okay. I was on my end. Sorry about that. Somehow.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. I was just about to text you to tell you to log in and log off or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so for clarity, you're saying, so some of the criticisms comes from Bishop Webster. He was ordained a priest by Bishop Henneberry, who himself was consecrated a bishop by the Palmar de Troya person, but was later, he's like, for whatever reason, he's like, I don't want any part of this group. And he was conditionally consecrated by Bishop Terason. Now, who is he? Do you know?
I don't really know him, honestly. He's one of the many Took bishops.
Sure.
I don't know his story very well about Terason.
Okay.
But yeah, he was the one that conditionally consecrated Henneberry. And if I remember correctly, it was Henneberry in 2002 that consecrated, not consecrated, ordained Bishop Webster a priest.
Even if your argument's correct by Pius XII, even if his let's just say his priestly line is dubious, if he was properly consecrated by a valid bishop, that supplements all that. That's what you're saying?
Yeah. And even if he wasn't conditionally consecrated by Terason, Henneberry probably still would have been a bishop. I mean, Palmar at that time would have still been using the rituals of the Roman Church and everything. So Yeah. So I mean, it's not really a problem of validity in the lines. What people will say is our connection to Palmar de Troya, and that's what Father Hewko's one of his main attacks is. It's a cloud of doubt, and a cloud of schism all over. It doesn't. That's not how schism works.
Right.
That's not how schism works. It doesn't pass on to ordination and ordinand all the way down the line, right? There's been there's 3,500 bishops in the world, or maybe more, that we don't know about, that the majority of them, probably if not all of them, have their orders coming through Arian heretics in the 300s. So that doesn't change whether they're valid, because back then these guys were Arian heretics or Protestant heretics or whatever,
to be honest, I mean, to me, I do think there seems to be some. Seems to be some kind of oddity about, let's say, Webster and this other line of people that was affiliated with. But to be honest, as may, is bishopric line seems to be not an issue. You go through Bishop Took and Gardlare and Bishop McKenna, then Bishop Slepke. I don't think anybody really has any, at least in the circles I'm running, there's many people that get their lineage. I mean, Bishop Sambor gets a lineage from Bishop McKenna, who got, Bishop McKenna consecrated Bishop Sambor, and I can, and then from Slepke to whoever. Whether or not Bishop Webster should have ever really been a bishop, like maybe he wasn't qualified. I mean, who knows if that's even true? But I'm saying, like, I have my skepticism of it all up his priestly lineage. I don't know who these people are. Like, I don't know who Bishop Terrazon is. I don't know Bishop Henneby. Who knows whether they're even qualified? Who knows if they had proper training? Who knows? All that question, right? I'm like, it's suspect in my mind. Okay, be that as it may, that doesn't take away his validity, is what you're saying. Right. I mean, if he's consecrated through these bishops, he's a valid bishop, and therefore it would make Bishop Pfeiffer valid bishop, and then you guys valid priest and so forth. Okay.
Yeah. So I also think, to add to what you're saying and kind of make it more conversational here, you said, like, it kind of seems suspect going back, and like I don't even know Terrazon. I don't know his story. I don't know all the Took line bishops, necessarily all of their stories all the way through. Like, I just brought up, Deloria. I know he was the personal theologian of Pius XII. McKenna is interesting because he's a Took line bishop that was kind of popular, and supposedly I think he was a priest in I forget the movie, not The Conjuring, but the older one. He was the father that came in and did the exorcism, the priest that came in and did the exorcism in one of those movies that's like The Conjuring. It was Father McKenna, which is interesting, but those kind of like little novelty things. But other than that, I think to have this mentality of, like, well, I don't know this priest, and I don't know that bishop, and Bishop Took himself, it's like, I don't, where was he going? And he was kidnapped, and it's just like, where was he at in his mind? And that's not how, and I'm not trying to like condemn any individuals or anything, but that's not how Catholic faithful thought before, and that's not how the church actually thinks either. Like, I always bring up to priests and people that ask about this, like, validity and everything, is like, if you're a faithful or you're a priest or whatever you are, clergy, whatever, you see a ceremony take place and you saw the priest go up there, he offered the bread, he offered the wine, he poured the water over the head, over the baby, he said words that nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, he said the words. You don't, like, faithful for 2,000 years didn't question that. I think that's something really important, because we take for granted these other sacraments, like, I can't even hear the priest saying "Hoc est enim." I can't hear him.
Sure.
Because it's supposed to be silent, so quiet that even the priest himself isn't supposed to hear his audible words. inarticulation.
Okay.
I mean, it happens, but technically even the priest himself, by the rubrics, isn't supposed to hear what he's saying, let alone the altar server, the faithful, or anyone, right? And so, did the priest say the words? Am I allowed to say I don't know? No, I'm not even allowed to say I don't know, let alone, or especially, he didn't say the words, because he did the ceremony. It took place, and that's what Pope Leo XIII says. And I think that's something that's really forgotten, is when Pope Leo XIII condemned as invalid the Anglican orders, he talked about the form of the sacraments, and he said, this is what he says in Apostolicae Curae, his encyclical about the validity of the Anglican orders, and he talks about all sorts of different sacraments and the rite of Apollinarius and Saint Apollinarius and things like that. He says, in regards to the intention of the minister, if the words are said and the ceremony takes place, he says the words in a serious way, then the sacrament itself is presumed valid. End of story, basically. End of story. Yep. And in regards to that, the church has always upheld, similar to marriage, that all the sacraments are protected by benefit of law, really. That, like in marriage, in the annulments, it requires 2 tribunals. The first one has to condemn the marriage as invalid, dead, not existing. The second one, then they have to do it again and put the marriage back on trial, whether it was valid or invalid. And then after that is when they finally determine whether it was valid or invalid. But people saying, well, I just doubt whether I had the right intentions. I doubt, and that's where the Novus Ordo comes in, right? Yeah. I doubt that I was like, mature enough, and I we didn't have so much compatibility, and I wasn't in my right state of mind. And so then all of a sudden you have a lot of chaos and a lot of sin, really, because people go away from their vows. And the church knew this, as Bishop Pfeiffer says. The church knew this for 2,000 years, that there would be men that would doubt their ordinations for the simple reason that, he says, oh, I just met Sally last week, and she's really pretty. I'm not so sure if I was meant to be, I was only 24 years old. I didn't have my right state of mind. I didn't even have a full-time job, and I didn't even, experience life, and but Sally's really pretty. So they leave the priesthood, right? Which you can't technically leave the priesthood. So the church knew that those kind of things would happen. The church knows human nature. And so it protects the sacraments by benefit of law, that the law protects the sacraments as presumed to be valid, not the other way around, which is what now we're getting because of the Novus Ordo. And you'll say, well, a lot of traditional people, they question all the sacraments. That's because of the Novus Ordo. It's because of the Novus Ordo sacraments, and because of the Novus Ordo theology, that people are questioning it, right? So then they start to judge the internal disposition of the priest, where it doesn't matter what the internal disposition of the priest is, right? So I think that's something important, is like a lot of faithful from 2,000 years didn't know, oh, my bishop of my diocese or my priest goes back to, St. Paul, or goes back to, St. Bartholomew. Like his lineage is through them. Like they didn't know that. They just went to their bishop, got confirmed or received ordinations, and to their priest, and got baptized and received the sacraments. They didn't look at, well, what's his line, right? And part of it is because of the crisis of the church, so people are more, of course, skeptical. And it's understandable that people are that way. But traditionally speaking, there wasn't that, right? And if I could, I know you probably want to move on to the next subject, but I would like to almost quote Bishop Williamson about the Took line and about Took himself.
Okay.
Bishop Williamson, when he was put to the question, and we actually have it on one of those videos I told you about on Quo Primum 1, we have a clip of him saying this. He says, someone asked him about, what do you think about Took in the Took line? And he says, Archbishop Took was a Vietnam man. He was a traditional bishop after Vatican II that wanted to preserve the Catholic faith and the Catholic priesthood. I presume that all of his sacraments were valid. And the reason I think to use Archbishop Took as an example here is good, and because it's not just about him in particular, but Bishop Williamson's reasoning is. And his reasoning is, he says, the reason I think this is because if he's a traditional bishop and he's trying to promote the traditional faith, it doesn't make sense for him to go around consecrating and ordaining men invalidly. That doesn't help the church. That makes things worse. So even though it seems like a beg the question statement, it's actually kind of somewhat profound if you just have like, it takes a sort of simpleness of faith, which I think in that moment, especially Bishop Williamson was kind of having, is like, he just was put to the test. He didn't think about, oh, well, what about Carmona and what about McKenna and what about Palmar de Troya? He wasn't thinking about all that, even though he's probably heard of all of it. He was just thinking, he was a traditional bishop. He opposed Vatican II. He wanted traditional sacraments and the traditional faith. I would think he would just consecrate and ordain validly. And he knew his theology. He spoke maybe, I think, 6 or 7 languages, and he knew his theology very well. So why would he consecrate and ordain invalidly?
You know, I interviewed Bishop Rodrigo de Silva, who is Sedevacantis bishop, and he was ordained by Bishop, I believe Bishop Williamson, and then eventually, you know, left, became Sedevacantis. But I asked him in the interview was, well, was there any doubt? You know, because I hear from Father Hewko, like, you know, they're invalid or whatever. And so was there any doubt about took consecrations and so forth in your circles when you were around like Bishop Thomas Aquinas and different people like that you were, you know? They said no. Everyone we all just knew them to be valid. Like there was no, so he wasn't hesitant to go and, you know, go work with the Took priests and so forth, because in his circles it was already believed them to be valid.
There was also another SSPX priest that was put to the question. I don't remember his name, but he was in Idaho. He was asked by one of our faithful, and our faithful kind of, you know, semi-facetiously, you know, asked him, because he didn't make it clear that he was one of our faithful. He just asked him, so what do you think about Bishop Pfeiffer being a bishop? He just asked him point blank. Mm-hmm. And he said this SSPX priest, which actually a few of them accept him as valid, said about Bishop Pfeiffer, he said, well, he's a smart man and he's a smart priest and he knows Latin. I don't see how he could arrange for himself to get invalidly consecrated. I think he's a bishop. I think he would have made sure. It was kind of a similar answer to Archbishop Took. You know, this priest, you know, he's one of our enemies. We fight against the SSPX. But he was, you know, non-biased, just saying, well, he's a smart priest. I think he would get himself validly consecrated. Why would he go through all that trouble to get invalidly consecrated? So I mean, it kind of just it comes down to this truth that we have to kind of like rehash. I think for a lot of Catholics that's important, because it has to do with defamation of character, right? Okay. When a man says he is something, I'm a police officer, I'm just not dressed as such. Okay, you're a police officer. All right, I'm a bishop, and he's dressing like a bishop. He's acting like a bishop. He carries a crozier. He goes and ordains men. He's doing these different things. You presume he's a bishop. That doesn't mean you aren't permitted to go and ask questions and say, hey, I'd like to go see, you know, people said something about your ceremony. I'm just going to go ask some questions. No problem. You're not obliged to like just be blind and like say, well, you know, blind, you know, I can't have my own thoughts. No, but your thoughts need to be reasonable. Generally, a man is what he says he is, unless you can prove to the contrary. And the Novus Ordo Watch has not proven to the contrary that he was not made not a bishop. Besides, even if they did definitively, demonstrably prove it in that video, they're not the authority of the church. The church would still require a tribunal, right?
Sure.
Now, clearly, if the ceremony didn't take place, or there were no witnesses and things like that, then that's pretty clear. Okay, the ceremony didn't take place because there's no witnesses, right? That's why there's witnesses. I was present. There were 10,000 people or plus that watched it on YouTube, and 30, 40 people in the sanctuary and in the congregation. So there were witnesses, and so I think that's important, as well as like, a man is what he says he is until you can prove to the contrary, right? Like, okay, I'm a police officer. Well, I have reasonable suspicion. Okay, but even if you have reasonable suspicion that he's not a police officer, in order to not acknowledge him as an officer or acknowledge him as the judge or whatever he claims to be, you should have demonstrable proof. And that's something I think that we're missing. A lot of traditional Catholics are missing, right? Because they'll just haphazardly say, just call, me Adam, or call Bishop Pfeiffer father, without, sometimes you just slip up because that's just, you're used to calling the person that, right? They weren't always a priest or they weren't always a bishop, but other times it's like clear, okay, you're doing it on principle, right? And that's kind of a different spirit than what the Catholic Church has had. Like it's basically presuming guilt until proven innocent, and that it tries to put the burden of proof on the person being attacked.
Would you say from the circles that you mainly run in, like to say the SSPX and the resistance, like the non-sedevacantist traditionalist type, like I think we answered the question. I think from at least from our circles, a lot of it was questioning the I guess you could say the validity of what took place and maybe the lineage. Okay, but from your circles, like the other resistance priests and maybe from the other resistance priests, what are the main issues that you tend to face? Is it mainly that Bishop Pfeiffer used a took bishop? And maybe we can get into why why did he use a took bishop? Like why? Maybe that'd be a question to ask. Maybe that'd be a criticism. Like, hey, why would you use this sedevacantist bishop when you're not sedevacantist, and why are you associating with this guy and so forth? Maybe that'd be a criticism. Right.
Yeah. So to answer the first part real quick, I'm not sure what most of them say. I know what Father Hewko says. And Father Chazal is a little more outspoken, and I'm trying to remember. It's been a year or two since I listened to his talks about Bishop Pfeiffer being a bishop. But the other ones don't really say much that I'm aware of about it. But ultimately, it kind of comes down to like, took line and, Palmar de Troya and a cloud of schism or something like that, which is how Father Hewko always tries to phrase it.
Sure.
Okay, so then I'm not sure about what the other resistance priests. We don't come in contact very much at all with them. Father Hewko's been the most out of any of them.
Okay.
That we've had any talk with, right? And I'm basically the only one.
Okay, here's maybe a criticism. Here's maybe a criticism. Just I can think I've seen would be Bishop Pfeiffer took the bishopric upon himself. He he went out and sought out a bishop so that he could be consecrated because he was desiring to, he had some prideful desire to be a bishop, and he wasn't. That kind of, you get the vein.
Yeah, that's one of the attacks. Yeah, that's one of the bigger attacks, I suppose.
Maybe you can address why he felt the need.
I would say that's more of the. There's not so many priests, I don't think, that will say that as much as like maybe some faithful and maybe people on YouTube that will say that, because and I think we did talk about this last week or whenever we spoke on the phone. Is Bishop Pfeiffer, when he was looking for a bishop to ordain us young men, I was just a first year, and then some of the seminarians were going into their fifth year, which should have been when they become subdeacons, right? So some of them were going into their fifth year. And so he was looking, and he had been looking for a long time, and he had tried to work with, Bishop Thomas Aquinas and Bishop Four and Bishop Williamson to an extent. But ultimately, it's like we would want Bishop Williamson before we would have, if he would have allowed, if he would have ordained any of us, we would have wanted him to recant about the grace in the new mass, because that's a serious error. But ultimately, Bishop Pfeiffer was not looking for someone to consecrate him. He was looking for someone to ordain us.
Okay.
When Bishop Pfeiffer had known Neil Webster at the time, in around the year 2000, he had known him in the late 90s, early 2000s, before he was Father Neil Webster in 2002. He knew him, but ultimately he didn't know much about him. He's kind of like one of the less known took bishops, but he had come across him. I don't remember exactly how, and then started talking to him. And Bishop Webster was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he talked to him about ordaining us. He didn't talk to him about getting consecrated himself. And ultimately what ended up happening, because Bishop Webster had some physical things, like he had a cane and things like that. So like it was kind of hard for him when he made the trip up just from Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where he's from. It's just a few hour drive, right?
Sure.
It was a little much for him, the drive back and forth. And so ultimately they had decided, and actually it was, a priest, an older priest here, that had told Bishop Webster, you need to consecrate Father Pfeiffer a bishop. That this is like for the good of souls, and we're trying to promote the good of souls in the seminary and the salvation and glory of God and the salvation of souls. And he said, you need to consecrate him a bishop, because this is what Our Lady would want, and this is what Our Lady wants. And ultimately, actually, Bishop Webster agreed to Father Pankras, that's his name, Father Pankras Raja Malayapan from India. He agreed to that. And so it wasn't at all Bishop Pfeiffer asking anywhere. It was more of us and Father Pankras in particular, who requested, and actually kind of in a sort of way stated or demanded in a way to Bishop Webster, you need to consecrate Bishop Pfeiffer a bishop, because he was getting older. He was already 74 at the time, and he had some health problems, and it was kind of like a practical thing too. Like I said, it would be difficult for him to come back and forth to do confirmations, to do ordinations and things like that. So Bishop Pfeiffer was not seeking to be a bishop. He was not seeking to be a bishop, but he agreed to actually, the whole, conversation with Father Pankras and Bishop Webster. And so, it was kind of at the behest of Father Pankras, who's kind of this old wise priest who is also a spiritual director for a lot of us, those of us who are ordained now. He was our spiritual director in the seminary. And Bishop Pfeiffer does look to him for advice, because he's older and wiser, in the sense of, he's been longer a priest and everything. He was ordained in 1968, before the new rite of ordination and all that. So ultimately, he didn't seek that to be consecrated a bishop, and he agreed to Bishop Webster doing it. And Bishop Webster actually told Father Pfeiffer, he said, your greatest calling card, because he wasn't necessarily going to help us out, because there were discrepancies with the sedevacantism and things like that. There were discrepancies, and he said, your greatest calling card is your seminarians. It seems like you're forming them correctly, in the spirit of the church. And that was kind of what his take on why he would want to help us out, because it seems like it would be good for the salvation of souls, that these men will be good priests. And so he ended up, of course, consecrating him. But what's interesting, because Bishop Pfeiffer and Bishop Webster, were going back and forth about sedevacantism, and they had long arguments and everything like that. And Bishop Webster actually made a concession in the ceremony, because even technically, if he didn't do it technically, it would be on Bishop Webster, on his side of, in his decision morally, whether he said the name of the Pope in the canon. But he ended up actually saying the name of the Pope in the canon, Pope Francis, for the ceremony. So whether, you could argue, well, he compromised or whatever, he did this or that, but he did say the name of the Pope in the canon. And then Bishop Pfeiffer swore allegiance or obedience in the true sense to Pope Francis, as a bishop. And so the sedevacantism, even if Bishop Webster wouldn't have made that little concession, because we see how the crisis in the church is and how we look at it, similar to the time of Archbishop Lefebvre, that even using like a bishop that maybe isn't perfectly correct in doctrine, like even Bishop Williamson, we would have preferred him to recant his saying there's grace in the Novus Ordo, which I think is, in a way, it could be considered more detrimental than sedevacantism of Bishop Webster. I think it's more detrimental, much more detrimental. But even if that wasn't recanted, for the salvation of souls and because of the dire need for priests that are traditional, which we do believe we're upholding unblemished the true Catholic faith and fighting modernism the correct way, and generally all of us are being formed correctly to fight that and to help souls, that for the sake of the preservation of the traditional priesthood and the preservation of the traditional Catholic faith, that alone would be reason enough. It's just putting it even in the subjective way of what we believe the crisis in the church and how bad it is. That would be enough to justify the consecration by, almost any, you could argue almost any valid bishop we would have preferred, we tried to go, have an uncompromised in all ways possible bishop. But at the end of the day, it's for the salvation of souls, and the ceremony itself is not the point of the ceremony of consecration is not the mass, but the point of the ceremony is to convey priesthood, to ordain men. So it's not about whether we're worshiping in a different religion or this person's compromised or not, because it's a ceremony of ordination, not mass. Mass happens to be part of it, but that doesn't change whether it's, valid and all that. So I know I'm kind of going off a little bit there on a tangent. I think the whole, he was sedevacantist, and then they'll say he was a Feeneyite, like in the Novus Ordo watch, that he was a Feeneyite. And Bishop Pfeiffer talked to Bishop Webster for long hours about Feeneyism, and he really found out that he wasn't a true Feeneyite when it came down to it. And I don't understand Feeneyism perfectly and all that, but he figured out he's not a true Feeneyite, because he did believe you can be justified without water baptism, and that it's not true Feeneyism, strictly speaking. So he's not an actual, technical Feeneyite in that way. He wasn't.
I feel like Collery addressed a lot of some of the main criticisms of of your group. I bet maybe people on the line. I believe the consecration one, maybe why he chose the route of getting himself consecrated. I think those really are and then maybe I think I touched on at least some of the main ones. So is there something else you want to clarify that?
I think there's something to be said about, and this is, like you said, anecdotal, right?
Sure.
Me as a priest, right, when I was kind of making my ways up in the orders, and I was porter, lector, exorcist, acolyte, subdeacon, deacon, the closer I got to priesthood, and I'm not saying like any merit on my part, but just thinking about the seriousness of priesthood and the level of responsibility that the priest has for souls and his own soul, that causes you to, even as a priest, to think about, is this, I'm going to go into this and I better be sure, I better be, because the priest is attacked by Satan. He has a target on his back, and he's going to be attacked personally with personal sins and temptations, right, that are a little different than just a lay person. And so, I could say I had a little bit of that kind of fear of, like, in a way, I would say it's kind of a reverential fear, that realizing that this is a serious task and you're going to be attacked, and you don't seek the priesthood for any glory. There's no glory really in the worldly sense, right? We live off of people's donations. We live off the generosity of the faithful and the Blessed Mother, and so like there's no wealth in it. And if anything, there's a lot of attacks. You're going to have some consolations, and a lot of the priests, myself included, have the great consolations of being able to baptize and being able to marry and being able to do all the things that the priest does and preach the holy faith. These are all glorious things in the supernatural sense. But you put it on the level of a bishop, and I think no priest in his right mind, and this is just me coming at it, thinking of it as like when I was a seminarian, thinking about being a priest and how fearful in the sense it was, that no priest in his right mind is going to seek after episcopacy and that responsibility, even though he's not going to be in charge of a diocese, right? That's a whole another level, right? Because Bishop Pfeiffer and all the bishops of tradition, they're not bishops and ordinaries of a diocese, which I think is also another important point, because people will say, why didn't he just submit to one of the bishops? And why didn't he just ask them if he could be a bishop and submit to them as his authority? They're not his authority. They don't have ordinary jurisdiction. He's the superior of our order. And so when he decided to get consecrated by Bishop Webster, he became an auxiliary bishop that has no ordinary jurisdiction. The only thing he gets to do as a bishop that changes anything is he can ordain men and consecrate other bishops and confirm people, do confirmations. He has no authority over diocese, so he doesn't even have that. And that's with all traditional bishops. They're auxiliaries. They have no ordinary jurisdiction. Bishop Pfeiffer has as much jurisdiction or authority over me as when he was Father Pfeiffer. There's no change in his authority. So I think that's important for the faithful to understand. A bishop's authority and tradition does not change just because he's a bishop. He has the same authority in the supplied state of necessity in the crisis of the church as a priest does over the faithful. The only reason he has authority over me is because he's our superior in our order. So the only thing he's received, I would say, in regards to the world, and people will say, well, he sought after the glory of the episcopacy or something, or like he took it upon himself, that honor. If you're looking at it in a worldly sense, if he was truly evil intent like that, it's not an honor in that sense to be a bishop. You got a bigger target on your back than the priest does. You're going to be spat on more. You're going to be ridiculed more. And actually, something very interesting that I think is fascinating that Bishop Pfeiffer said, when he said when he became a bishop, he was actually expecting to get more attacks than what happened. He was actually expecting a lot more, because when you become a bishop, that's kind of what happens. He was expecting it, right? And it didn't happen like he thought, right? Because I think part of it is that people are within tradition. There's so many priests, there's so many bishops that it just it does get tiring to try to figure out, oh, what's the line of that guy? What's the line of this guy? What's the line of this guy? And eventually people just get fed up with that kind of fight. Mm-hmm. And hopefully the good, faithful people, the good intended people are thinking, like, what does he say? What is the truth that he says, or untruth or lies? What does he say? More so than, what's his background and what's his, those things are good. It's important. Like I told you a little bit about my background, and I think those are good things for some of the faithful to hear. But at the end of the day, it's, what is this priest's stance on Vatican II? What is this bishop's stance on Vatican II in the new Mass? What does he teach about natural family planning? What does he teach about, current issues that traditional Catholics are falling for? And so, yeah, he definitely didn't seek out the episcopacy for his own glory. There's nothing really glorious about it, right? I mean, there'll be some faithful that respect him as a bishop and they'll kneel down and kiss his ring, but it's like he goes in public and it's just, he's walking around, he has the episcopacy, but it's not really like something like glamorous,
Right. All right. I thought about just out of maybe some there might be some set of contests that watchers might be curious. What's your guys' view of set of contests that I don't know if you have any that have might attend your chapel, and or at least what do you see like within the resistance and maybe in your guys that studies are welcome, not welcome? Like,
Yeah.
how does that compare to like maybe the mainline SPX, your guys's, and
I mean, in regards to them being welcomed or not welcomed, it's kind of the same. I mean, we don't check at the door if someone's set of a contest or, this or that. We don't check that. If we find out someone is, we'll try to talk to them why it's bad, but we won't ever refuse them sacraments based on that. We don't do like the Society of St. Pius V does from the pulpit, where they'll say, if you go to CMRI, if you go to SSPX, if you go to the Resistance, if you go to the Novus Ordo, if you go to any of these places, and then you cannot come to Holy Communion. I think they even say, unless you go to confession first for having gone to those places. So no, we don't, there's nothing like that. And they're the only ones I've ever heard doing that.
Yeah,
I know there's individual set of a contest priests that might have their personal ways of, when they refuse people Holy Communion and things like that. No, we don't. We receive them as Catholic faithful, and they're Catholic. And, part of that is we understand that there's a huge crisis in the church. People are legitimately confused, and we try to help them. And that's our whole point. We don't want to tell them you're going to hell because you have this mistake or you have that, because there's so much confusion since the 1960s, especially, that it's hard to condemn anyone as if like they were a Protestant excommunicate, right?
One of the things we mentioned, I think, last time we talked was that maybe like a set of contests and yourself. Maybe you said that set of contests were more open to talking with you. You've talked more with, I think, with set of contests, and it's because I was saying maybe it's because we're both. We're both like mud slung on us all the time, though. You get all this mud slung on you, and then we get all this mud slung on us instead of a contest. So we're like, maybe there's a bond.
Yeah, who cares? At that rate, it's like, who cares what people think if I talk to this priest or that person or whatever. Yeah. That's kind of how it is. Yeah, we meet some set of a contest priests or bishops in public, and they'll talk to us. They won't like turn the other direction or whatever. They'll be cordial, and we'll have a debate about sedevacantism, and it'll be cordial like regular men, right? Yeah. But yeah, I think that you kind of hit on something kind of profound there, which is, in trying our best to follow Christ, all of us, any person that's truly trying to follow Christ and the true teachings of the Catholic Church, there's a certain level of human respect that you have to let go of. And I think a lot of the sedevacanist priests have dealt with that. And I think, we've dealt with that. Father Pfeiffer, Bishop Pfeiffer has dealt with that. A lot of traditional priests have dealt with that. And so we don't get these, we don't necessarily get these, we don't get these big platforms. We don't get these big names out there and all that kind of thing. This is like, for us, kind of one of the bigger things, like to be on, your show and, your podcast. But it's, yeah, you get to that level where it's like, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what people say. And, a priest is a priest, and receive him with love and with charity, and talk to him about the faith. And, we'll get down to our differences eventually, and sure, we'll debate about it. But ultimately, it's like, we don't call them not Catholic. We don't treat them as schismatics or something like that. And I think generally they don't treat us that way either. At least the ones I've run into. So I think there's something to be said about that we're used to being spat upon, as a lot of like CMRI priests are, and, took line priests and bishops are. There's something to be said about that for sure.
Yeah. And Yeah, I said I've always enjoyed our conversations, Father, on X. I know we have gotten into the Sede issue I think a few times, but even though I've always enjoyed it, it's been you've been really pleasant to talk with, and
Yeah.
and I'm glad we did this. It was good.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was fun, and I get to learn a little bit about who you guys are, and then hear it from hear you guys' perspective
Yeah.
on you know I'm not kind of like an outsider looking in, because I haven't been around the resistance that as much. I mean, I did attend some. I guess he'd be like a resistance priest, but years ago. But I'm not as familiar like with the internal battles that you guys might have faced with the other resistance people. So it's kind of interesting, hearing your story and hearing you defend,
Yeah.
you defend your position, because and maybe it's good to hear I like to hear both sides.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like to hear both sides.
And if I could add to like just a couple things. One is kind of like the doctrinal side of things is, our stance is just simply that of St. Pius X, that I studied Pascendi pretty in depth in the seminary, and Bishop Pfeiffer is pretty good at explaining it. And that evolution is kind of like the essential problem, the essential heresy we're dealing with, which is modernism. It's synonymous, and that this is what's trickled down in the Society of St. Pius X. This is what has trickled down into a lot of traditional groups, and that we're experiencing because of Vatican II. Vatican II couldn't have happened if it weren't for evolution. Yes, there was bad guys that chose to do bad things, but if their minds weren't poisoned with evolution, which all of us to a certain extent, because we've been taught it, because we see it in the media, because we see it everywhere, we're contaminated to an extent. And so we're trying to root that out of ourselves, out of our faithful, and in place put the full integral Catholic faith uncompromised. And we're doing that, and we're trying to spread that everywhere. Like our Lord said, go ye to all nations. So we have Africa, we go to Africa, we go to Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, we go to Philippines, Australia, India, and Ireland, England. So all over the world, Canada, and then Mexico now a little bit. And so we're all over. We have about 70 places in the United States that we go to, and that could be someone's home. It could be a chapel itself. It could be a rented community center. We go wherever there is faithful calling for us. And at the tip of a hat, if someone needs an extreme unction and it's a serious call, then we'll go, and we'll take up a lot of the extreme unction calls that the Society of St. Pius X main body won't accept, because the person hasn't been in their directory for so long, or they haven't been to Mass so long, so they won't do the extreme unction. So we're doing a lot of those extreme unction calls, and there's faith, the baptism, the faith being promoted everywhere that we go. And that's what it's about. Anywhere we go, it doesn't matter if we're in the grocery store, or if we're in Timbuktu, or whether we're in Mexico City or wherever. So there's that, as well as, just realizing that a lot of this in-house fighting and within Catholicism, and then more specifically, I should say, within traditional Catholicism, which is the true Catholicism, obviously, is that at the end of the day, to condemn individuals is not what we're about. We're here to condemn doctrine and promote true doctrine, condemn false doctrine and promote true doctrine, and instill that doctrine into souls in the state of grace, and increase that in souls. And insofar as Vatican II is promoted, insofar as modernism and evolution is promoted, there will be these divisions, there will be people confused, and there will be people going to hell, which is why we exist. That's why I became a priest, is because I want souls to go to heaven. I want my soul to go heaven. I want to go to heaven. And I saw that there was a serious crisis in the church, and I volunteered. I didn't grow up always thinking like I wanted to be a priest, and that's a really good thing and a holy thing, and should be fostered in children. But I didn't think that. I didn't know anything really until I was about 19, 20 years old, and I started thinking about how bad things are in the world. And so we need more volunteers. We need more souls promoting the traditional Catholic faith and condemning evolution and condemning Vatican II, and saying what the real problem is, not the abuses, And that's why I brought up about my dad and I. We saw the abuses, but that's not what made us leave. And I think that's something really important in traditional Catholicism, is that people get politically driven or heated. And we're supposed to be political. We're political animals, but politically driven in the sense of, oh, look at this scandal. Look at that clown mask. Look at all these beach balls and, dancing and kumbaya and the Novus Ordo. And okay, we can point out some of those things, but when that's like your way of getting viewers and your way of getting publicity, that's not really for the Catholic faith. Yes, we have to point out why the new Mass is bad, but that's not why the new Mass is bad. The new Mass is bad because it's a different Mass than what Christ handed down to us and that the Roman Church had for 2,000 years. In its perfect form, it's evil and intrinsically evil. And the new SSPX won't say that. And that's why we're opposed to the new SSPX. Not because this priest is bad or this priest is good or indifferent. It's because their new shift. I think a lot of those priests, probably all of them, are more holy than myself or a lot of my those in my community. But St. Teresa of Avila put it really well. She said, if I were to choose a spiritual director, and you could say this in the loose sense of if I were to choose to go to a priest in general, if I were to choose a spiritual director that was either holy but didn't know his theology as well, and I would add maybe he was mixed up in theology, he was holy and he didn't know his theology as well, or a priest that was not as holy but knew his theology and he's a wise priest and a good spiritual director in that way, I would choose the wise priest. And this is where we are. It's like, even though maybe I'm simple, and we have other priests that are a little more intelligent and erudite, that we have the wisdom of the church. We have the wisdom of 2,000 years of the Catholic faith that St. Joan of Arc had, who couldn't read, that St. Bernadette had that couldn't read. We have that simple wisdom of holding on to the Catholic faith. And when it comes time to answer the heresies or answer the enemies of the church, we feel like we're equipped to do that. We know we're equipped to do that. Whether we be faithful to that, instrumentality or not is a different question. But I think that's something important that people need to realize. We don't want to fight individuals. And that's what it kind of began as in 2012. The resistance priests attacked Bishop Fillet, and the faithful attacked Bishop Fillet, he's evil. Or at Vatican II, Paul VI, he's evil. Okay, yeah, maybe these are evil men, but when they die, we still have the problem that they helped implement. And we're going to have to fight that problem. That's not the essential problem, right? We have to call them out, but that's not the essential problem. Just like the abuses in the new Mass are not the essential problem. The essential problem is there's a different teaching, and it's in the Vatican II documents, and a lot of traditionalists will not say that. So, and I think that's kind of quintessential, again, using that word, to our position, is that we try to say very clearly this is our stance about the new Mass and grace in the new Mass, and Vatican II itself is evil, not the fruits of Vatican II. Those are evil too. Vatican II itself is evil. And so, and I think that's, very much glossed over by a lot of, indult groups, you could say. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a lot of things that we would have agreement on between us, Father, what you're saying there for sure. I actually really appreciate that you guys do a lot of travel, and you guys, like this, like myself, who I go to the CMRI, they go all over the place too. They're tirelessly traveling, getting the sacraments out to people, and I see you guys doing that too, and Father Hewko and different others, that. So I kind of really respect that. It's just a lot of work, and I like that you condemn evolution and all that. I'm very much opposed to that lie. So I don't hear too many people speaking out against it, to be honest. But maybe they're just not as knowledgeable. I did hear a sermon by one of Bishop Pfeiffer's priests that recently did a sermon on it. It was pretty good. But it's not. I don't expect people to just talk about it all the time. But but it's good to hear it. Yeah. So, but anyway, Father, we've been on for about 2.5 hours. Yeah. It's fun, but so I'm gonna let you go. I really enjoyed this. This was good. So I've enjoyed our talk. So this is another one I've enjoyed doing with you. Is there anything else that you might want to add or whatever? I mean, I'm not kicking you off right now, though. Just
no.
Way, but I'm just kind of closing kind of stuff that something that you've been wanting to say or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I could put it this way. Obviously, everyone needs to keep the state of grace and increase that state of grace. If you're not growing in it, then you're going downhill. There's no such thing as stagnant grace or static grace. It's alive and it increases if you're receiving and responding to it. And the new Mass is against that. It doesn't help you in that regards. And in regards to, tradition and the traditional Catholic faith, obviously I would say, generally like, with the sedevacantism, we're against the sedevacantism very starkly, and that's a whole different topic, but it doesn't mean we have to uphold anything that the popes say, just because we're against sedevacantism. It means we're following what the church has always taught and following what the pope is supposed to be saying if he was acting in his right mind, right? And so that's important too. And then, so go to the sacraments. Don't have this mentality, though, that a lot of traditionalists do, that, well, I have to get my Sunday sacraments, because there's so many buffet traditionalists, right? They say, well, I can go to Mass here and go to Mass there, even though we'll receive all the different people ourselves, right? And we'll try to convince them about why our position's right. That mentality is so rampant of, well, I'll go to sacraments here, go to sacraments there, because this is, as long as it's a traditional Latin Mass and the priest doesn't say any heresy. No, that's not the qualifications for you to go to a Mass. You want the priest to be upholding true, sound, traditional Catholic doctrine. The indult priests are clearly not doing that because they say the new Mass is legitimate and they have to accept the new Mass as the ordinary form. That's the condition for them to be able to say the Latin Mass. That's called a compromise of faith. That's a compromise. If your condition of being able to have permission to say the true Mass is based upon your authorities telling you have to accept the new Mass as legitimate, then you're not correctly administering the sacraments. You're doing it in an evil vein, by accepting evil things. And so I think that's important to know. What does that organization teach? What is their position on Vatican II? The SSPX's position is, basically what Bishop Pfieffer said, 95% of Vatican II is good, which may be individually taken, but when you look at a document or you look at a council, you say it's good or bad. You don't say, well, it said some truths. The devil says truths. So I think that's something important. Look at what the organization's position is on Vatican II and the new Mass. Institute of Christ the King, Fraternity of St. Peter, SSPX now accept the new Mass as legitimately promulgated. That's not unacceptable. I don't think that's an acceptable position for a traditional Catholic. Not just that I think that. It's not acceptable for a traditional Catholic to think that. And so, be careful about the teaching. I would just kind of cap it off with that. Be careful about the teaching. And our Lord said about his sheep that I know mine and mine know me, right? And the shepherd, when you have a flock of sheep or goats, they recognize the voice, right? And I think it's something where those who are of the household of the faith, everything is good unto those that are of the household of the faith. And even if some people are making mistakes here and there, and none of us are perfect, right? We want to always be gearing towards the sound doctrine, and that's where St. Pius X's answer to modernism, and I'll try to end it on this. His answer to fighting modernism is, of course, doctrinally, he says the basic catechism, and I would add, the Baltimore Catechism without the new illustrations of evolution and garbage in it, but the old Baltimore Catechism from the 1800s. And then St. Pius X said St. Thomas Aquinas. If we go by those two, St. Thomas Aquinas and the Catechism, the basic Catechism, you will fare well within this storm of modernism. And so study your catechisms. The priests, we priests have to study our catechisms still continually. Study your catechisms. No matter how advanced you get, you have to study your catechism. And then to the extent that you're able to, read St. Thomas Aquinas. Don't be a lay theologian, though. This is becoming really popular, and don't become an online lay theologian that has everything to say about St. Thomas's Tertia Pars, question 60, Article 3, Article 8, reply to objection 3 or whatever. Don't be a lay theologian. This has always been like the church has never promoted lay theologians in that way. I don't recommend ever anyone to go get their theology degree for the purpose of teaching or anything like that. Laymen are not meant to teach faithful theology, right? It's fine to be a catechist. That's a little different. But to teach St. Thomas or to teach the scripture to laymen, that's out of range of the faithful. That shouldn't be there. Now, a lot of those people will say, well, I'm only doing it because the priests aren't doing it. There's some truth to that, because the priests aren't doing it unsullied and uncompromised. A lot of them aren't. But the problem is easily these Catholic YouTubers are falling into making extra rules that the church doesn't have. That's not okay. And that's kind of what the Pharisees did, actually. The Pharisees were not priests, and they created extra rules and burdens on the faithful and extra recommendations that certain YouTubers might do for the faithful that the church hasn't even said that you have to do as a Catholic, right? I've heard one YouTuber, I won't name him, he said, yeah, you need to abstain from meat, but that's not enough on Friday. You also should try not to watch TV, and you should try not to go out and buy things or, deal in worldly things. No, don't recommend that. You should try not to have a spirit of the world, but you're a layman, and even priests don't recommend that and say, but you're a layman telling faithful that, well, maybe on top of giving up meat, you should just not engage in the world that day. So they're putting extra stipulations and extra piety that is not part of the spirit of the church, even not just the rules, but that's not the spirit of the church, So I would say just be careful of the Catholic apologist, in the sense of he's teaching you scripture, he's teaching you St. Thomas. I don't think there's any problem with gentlemen like yourself talking about topics that are going on in the church and political things going on, and engaging with priests or bishops and talking to them about their positions. I think that's good, but be careful to I've heard it said that humility is a virtue. Obviously, humility is kind of like knowing your place and taking it, right? I'm not the greatest of all orators, right? And so I'm not necessarily going to be the greatest retreat master or all these different things. I can do retreats, and I can give sermons, and I can do all these different things, but I might not be the one to put on a seminar, right? I could see Bishop Pfeiffer doing that, or maybe one of our priests, Father Cook, or one of the other priests doing it. But I would say kind of just realize where you're at. Don't get fearful, because so many traditional Catholics get fearful that I don't know what's what, and I don't know what this is. Keep your faith in Christ, pray the rosary, keep the state of grace. Try to know what the position of the priests are on Vatican II and the new Mass when you talk to them. And then from there, you work out, where should I go to Mass, but to not just don't act in fear. The enemy wants us to be in fear. But when you have the Blessed Mother, when you have the rosary, you have her scapular, you stay devoted, and you read your catechism, and then maybe under the guidance of a priest studying St. Thomas, those things are really good. Those are really recommendable and commendable. So, but I want to thank you, Greg, for having me on, and definitely, if I ever see any of your faithful anywhere, I'd be more than happy to talk to them. And if they have any questions, our website's pretty decently easy to find. If you look up Our Lady of Mount Carmel, you can find our church website on there, Boston, Kentucky, and so just one Catholic faith, and it whole and unsullied, right? And that's what matters. Is our Lord didn't say at the end of time, he said, when the Son of Man returns, will he find beautiful cathedrals? Will he find Gregorian chant? Will he find men that are super articulate, and will he find all these priests that dress in this traditional garb? That's important. We need to be identifiable as Catholic priests. Wear the cassock, wear the biretta, wear the collar. But he said, will I find faith? Will he find faith? And so keep the faith and grow it. Don't just keep it, spread it, as one priest wisely said. We have an apostolic faith, and it's a missionary faith. So if you're not spreading it, you're starting to lose it yourself, right? So,
well, Father, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna end the recording, but just stay on. You know what I mean?
okay.
And then I'm gonna
and we can end in a prayer. How about that?
Say again, Father.
We'll end in a prayer then.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Father.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Our Lady of Mount Carmel,
pray for us.
Sorrowful and Immaculate Heart of Mary,
pray for us.
Our Lady, Seat of Wisdom,
pray for us.
Saint Bernard,
pray for us.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen.
All right. God bless you, Greg, and all of your listeners as well.
Thank you, Father.